Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I still remember the first night I heard the noise upstairs. It was right after I moved into this old building with its thick brick walls and wooden windows that creak when the wind hits. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when the sound of something heavy scraping across the floor above me made me sit up straight. It was loud. My heart started racing right away. I tried to brush it off as normal apartment noises, but it didn't stop. I heard long, steady footsteps pacing from one side of the unit to the other. They were heavy and they made my ceiling vibrate. I felt my bed shake a little. My stomach tightened. I told myself it was just a new neighbor moving furniture around or doing some late-night rearranging. But deep down, something about it felt off. It was too rhythmic, almost like there was a path being followed. I live on the third floor of a 4-story building. My apartment is small with one bedroom, a narrow living room, and those old wooden windows that slam shut if you don't secure them with a wedge. The building is known for its dated construction. People say the walls are so thick you can barely hear a neighbor's TV. But somehow I could hear every bump, scrape, and step from the apartment above. The first time I heard it, I didn't think much beyond mild annoyance. But the noise kept happening every night around 11. Sometimes it sounded like furniture was being dragged across the floor. Other times I caught what sounded like someone dropping something heavy, followed by low, dull thuds that echoed through my ceiling. In the morning, I'd see the neighbor from upstairs stepping into the elevator, dressed in a suit. He looked like a regular office worker, tired face, plain haircut, always rushing out the door. I'd try to catch his eye to say hello. He'd nod, sometimes mumble a polite hey, but never more than that. We rarely crossed paths because I work from home and he left early. By the time he got back, it was usually late at night. I used to wonder if he heard my TV or if I was bothering him with my own noise. But then I remembered how thick these walls are. We're lucky if we hear each other at all. Except I was hearing every single thing from upstairs. Every night I waited for the clock to hit 11. I don't know why it happened at that specific time, but it did. As soon as I realized it was close to that hour, I'd feel a little tension in my chest. I'd be on my couch, maybe scrolling through my phone or watching a show, but my focus would be shot. I couldn't get into anything because I knew what was coming. And then, like clockwork, I'd hear those footsteps. Slow, heavy, one after the other. Sometimes they paused for a few seconds. Then I'd hear the distinct sound of something dragging across the floor. It reminded me of a table or a chair being pushed around. There was a low scraping noise, then another series of thumps that rattled my ceiling lamp. By that point, I'd be wide awake, my heart thumping faster than normal, my palms getting a bit clammy. I kept telling myself to ignore it. Maybe the guy upstairs was just restless. Maybe he had insomnia, or he liked to rearrange his furniture at night. But the noise wasn't consistent with normal activity. It was too deliberate. It would go on for about an hour, give or take. Then it would stop as suddenly as it started. When it stopped, I'd lie there in bed, waiting for another round of scraping or stomping. Sometimes I'd doze off, only to jolt awake at the sound of another thud. It felt like I was living in a kind of loop. Day was quiet, night brought noise, morning was normal again. One night I got fed up. I decided to go upstairs and knock on his door. This was around midnight. I was in pajamas, but I slipped on some shoes and grabbed a flashlight because the hallway lights in this building tend to flicker. When I stepped out of my apartment, though, the corridor was silent. I could hear a faint hum from the fluorescent lights, but nothing else. No footsteps above, no scraping, no dragging. It felt like I had walked into a vacuum. I hesitated at the elevator, wondering if I should just go back. But I was so keyed up that I pressed the button and rode up one floor. The doors slid open. The hallway there was empty. No lights under his door. No sound of movement. Nothing at all. I approached his apartment and knocked lightly. Then I knocked harder. No answer. I listened carefully. I couldn't hear breathing or even a radio. After a minute, I gave up and went back down to my place. As soon as my head hit the pillow, the noise returned. Dragging, stomping, more dragging. My eyes went wide. I felt a cold prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I checked the time, 11:20. I tried talking to a few neighbors on my floor, but no one else seemed to hear anything. Some told me they slept with earplugs, others said they never heard a peep. The building manager, our superintendent, shrugged and told me the walls are thick and maybe I have some shared beam or pipe that's carrying noise from a different part of the structure. He suggested I ignore it. That's what I tried to do for a while. Then, about 3 weeks ago, I noticed something strange. I hadn't seen the upstairs guy for days. I assumed he was on a work trip, but the noise at 11 kept going. It was as loud as ever. Furniture scraping, footsteps, sporadic thumps. A few nights later, I decided to stay up and watch a movie until I heard the sounds begin. As soon as it started, I ran out into the hallway to confirm it. Again, the corridor was silent and still. No strange echoes, no movement. I went back inside. The noise continued above my head like clockwork. One morning, I ran into the building superintendent in the lobby. He asked me if I had any contact information for the guy on the 4th floor. I said I didn't. He told me that the guy had moved out weeks ago, maybe even a month. I felt my stomach twist when he said that. I told him I'd just heard noises coming from that apartment the night before. He said that was impossible because the unit was empty, and the keys had been returned. I kept my mouth shut after that because I didn't want to sound paranoid. But inside, I felt a tightness in my chest that lingered for the rest of the day. That night, the noise returned again at the usual time. I sat in my armchair, staring at the ceiling. My hands were shaking a little. The floor above me creaked with heavy footsteps. It sounded like 2 or 3 sets of steps, but it could have been just one person moving around. The scraping noise started again. My ceiling fixture jiggled. I could see dust drifting down from the corners. My mouth went dry. I wanted to run upstairs, but I felt an odd sense of dread. The place was supposed to be empty. Yet I was hearing distinct activity right above me. I tried calling the superintendent on his cell phone. He didn't pick up. I paced around my living room, listening to the steady thump of footsteps overhead. I considered calling the police, but I didn't have enough to go on except weird noises in an empty unit. My mind spun with possibilities. Could someone be squatting there? Maybe a homeless person found a way in. Or perhaps a contractor was using the space without permission. But why would they only show up at 11 at night? Why would they drag furniture around? The next day, I convinced myself I should do something more direct. I waited until the afternoon, when the noise was never present. I took the elevator up and tried the door. It was locked. I put my ear against it. I heard absolutely nothing. I checked the hallway window, looked around for any signs of forced entry, but everything looked normal. The door was dusty, the handle cold. I stood there for a while, feeling a weird unease in the pit of my stomach. Eventually, I went downstairs and tried to go about my day. That evening, I got home from running errands around 7. I fixed a quick dinner, tried to watch some TV to calm my nerves. By 10:30, I was on edge. My heart was already racing, and I hadn't even heard a sound yet. I jumped at small creaks in my own apartment. When my clock read 10:55, I turned off all the lights. I sat in the dark on my couch, listening. At exactly 11:01, I heard the first thump. It was directly above my kitchen area. Then came another thump by the living room section of the ceiling. The footsteps moved methodically. My breathing got shallow, and I felt a tightening around my chest. I quietly walked to my front door, opened it just a crack, and listened in the hallway. The hall was silent. Not a single sound. I came back in and shut the door. The footsteps and scraping noises continued above me. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and looked up at the ceiling. Bits of paint flaked off around the corners each time there was a heavy thud. I could feel vibrations under my feet, like the whole building was transferring that movement down to me. Then I heard a long scraping sound, like a piece of furniture being dragged across the entire length of the apartment. My skin broke out in goosebumps. My heart pounded so hard I felt a pressure in my ears. At that point, I started talking out loud to myself. I said things like, "This isn't happening. That apartment is empty." But the noises kept going. The tension in my body turned into a constant ache in my shoulders. I was done ignoring it. I grabbed my keys and my phone, stormed out to the hallway, and took the stairs up to the 4th floor. I stopped right outside the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I tried it. Locked. I pressed my ear against the wood. It felt cold and lifeless. No sounds from the other side. I stood there, breathing fast. My mind was buzzing with confusion. If someone was in there, I would have heard them. But the hallway was quiet, just a faint hum from the overhead light. After a few seconds of silent listening, I turned around and made my way back to the stairs. My phone's flashlight caught specks of dust in the air. I went down to my apartment, closed the door, and locked it. The noises resumed as soon as I sat on my couch. I couldn't wrap my head around it. It was like the sound was sealed in that space, only audible from my apartment. The next day, I told the superintendent everything. He repeated that the unit was empty, that the previous tenant had moved out, and that no one else had the key. He said maybe it was the old plumbing or some pipes expanding at night. That didn't make sense to me. I knew the difference between a pipe creaking and the sound of actual footsteps. We argued for a bit, but he shrugged and said he had no idea what else to tell me. I felt frustrated and confused. I started sleeping in the living room with the TV on, hoping it would mask the noises. It didn't help much. The footsteps and dragging sounds penetrated my ceiling with the same intensity every night. Sometimes I'd get so freaked out that I'd go outside and walk around the block until I felt calmer. But when I came back, the noises were still there. My anxiety started affecting my appetite. I'd skip meals because my stomach was in knots. One night, the dragging sound got worse. It went on for a full hour, constant scraping from one end of the apartment to the other. My ceiling light swung a little with each vibration. I was sure something was about to break. My chest felt tight and my forehead got clammy. I kept checking the time, pacing back and forth in my living room. I held my phone ready to call someone, but I didn't know who. My hands shook, and I could feel my pulse in my neck. At around midnight, the scraping stopped. The footsteps slowed down, then faded. I sat on the floor, exhausted. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was imagining it, but my ears weren't lying. I could feel those vibrations. The next day, I thought about trying to contact the owner of the unit, but I didn't know who that was. The superintendent wouldn't give me personal details. He probably thought I was a nuisance by then. I even contemplated breaking in just to prove to myself there was nobody there. But I couldn't bring myself to do that. Now, I sit here every night, waiting for the noises to start. They always do. The neighbor is gone. The unit is empty. Yet the sounds of footsteps and dragging furniture continue without fail. I feel stuck. Part of me wants to march upstairs, break the lock, and see what's inside. Another part of me thinks that's a terrible idea. Maybe it's better not to know. Maybe I should just pretend I don't hear anything. But the noises aren't getting any quieter. If anything, they're becoming more frequent. Some nights they start earlier, around 10:30, and go until midnight. I can't sleep. I can't think straight. I feel my pulse throbbing in my temple every time I hear the first thump. Each morning, I wake up with dark circles under my eyes and a dull ache in my chest. I haven't told my friends because I don't want them to think I'm losing it. But I can't live in denial forever. I wonder if I should just pack up and move. This building is old and the rent is cheap, but that's not worth the stress I'm going through. Still, moving costs money I don't have right now. So I'm here night after night listening to something that shouldn't be happening. It's 10:55 now. I'm hunched over my kitchen table, typing this out because I need to vent. I'm already bracing for the sound. My hands are shaking a bit. I keep swallowing because my throat feels dry. The window next to me rattles with a light breeze, but that doesn't hide the sound that's about to start. I look up at the ceiling, and my stomach churns. There's a faint creak. Right on schedule. My heart rate picks up. I can hear a slow, steady step from above. Then another. My ceiling lamp trembles. I feel my chest getting tighter. The scraping begins, and it reverberates through my entire apartment. I place my hands over my ears, but it doesn't help. The sound goes straight through me. My lungs feel squeezed. My mind races. My back is cold with sweat. I don't know what's making these noises. I don't know if it's a person, something else, or if I'm just hearing some strange quirk of this old building. But it's real. I feel it in my bones. And I can't decide what to do. Should I go upstairs and see for myself? Should I force the door open? Should I risk looking like a lunatic to the superintendent? Or should I keep pretending I don't hear these late-night movements? Right now, the footsteps are heavy and constant. My ceiling creaks under the weight of each step. The scraping noise is louder than ever. My ears are ringing. I'm tired and I'm scared. I don't have any proof, but I know something is up there. Something that moves furniture around and walks back and forth in an empty apartment. The superintendent says it's vacant, it's supposed to be empty, but I can hear the noises plain as day. And they won't stop. I guess that's my story so far. No one's been hurt. No one else has reported anything. I'm alone in this. And I'm losing sleep. I can't keep living with these nightly visits. But I also can't bring myself to face whatever's upstairs. At least not yet. For now, I'll just sit here, hands shaking, teeth clenched, listening to the steady thump of footsteps above my head in that locked, empty apartment. Maybe tomorrow I'll do something about it, or maybe I won't. I honestly don't know. But this is my life right now, and I can't pretend it isn't happening. All I can do is sit here night after night waiting for that first thud at 11, and so it continues. I still remember the first moment I heard those footsteps echoing in a place that should have been empty. My name is Mark. I've been working as a security guard in a building materials warehouse located in a rundown industrial zone on the outskirts of town. I've got a routine that usually involves walking around the perimeter, checking the fences, and making sure the entrance gate is locked. Most nights, nothing happens. I fill out a logbook, note any small events, and wait for my shift to end. That's how it was for the first few months. Everything was quiet and predictable. The isolation never bothered me. I'm not a social guy, and spending long hours alone never felt stressful. I used to lean against the entrance post, watch the distant lights of nearby factories, and feel comfortable in my own space. But one night, everything changed. Now, I don't feel relaxed when I start my shift. I feel tense. I arrive at the warehouse around 10 p.m. The outside lights are dim, just enough to see the main gate and part of the parking lot. The yard is mostly gravel and concrete slabs. The building is large with metal walls and a high ceiling. Trucks come by during the day, but after 6 p.m., the place goes silent. There's a small office at the front. That's where I keep my stuff. A thermos of coffee, a flashlight, and the control panel that displays the camera feeds. The security system isn't fancy. We have a few cameras placed near the loading docks and along a couple of interior corridors. I can see them on a small black and white monitor. The sensors pick up motion, and if they detect anything, they create a highlight on the screen. In normal conditions, I only see small blips when a stray cat wanders in, or if a plastic sheet flutters in the wind near an open window. But recently, those blips have started to feel ominous. The first time I heard the footsteps, it was around 2 a.m. I was sitting on a metal stool inside the office. I had the door open because it gets stuffy in there, especially during warmer nights. The interior of the main warehouse was dark, but there's a long corridor that leads from the office area to a series of storage rooms. It's a dull space, with concrete floors and walls lined with shelves full of spare parts and boxes of tiles. I heard the footsteps coming from that corridor, distinct and measured. At first, I thought it might be the sound of water dripping on a loose plank, or maybe some piece of machinery expanding or contracting. But it didn't sound random. It was a pattern of steps, like someone was walking slowly. I stood up and grabbed my flashlight. My stomach tightened. I felt a sudden wave of cold sweat on the back of my neck. I told myself it could be a thief looking for copper wire or tools to steal. That wouldn't be unusual around here. So I walked out of the office and turned on my flashlight. The corridor was dark. My beam cut across stacks of pallets, showing dust hanging in the air. I moved slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on the far end. The footsteps stopped as soon as I got close. I called out, "Is anyone there?" I didn't get an answer. I expected maybe the sound of someone running away, or a quick shadow darting behind a shelf. But there was nothing. The place was silent except for the faint buzz of a distant light bulb. My hands were sweaty. I felt my grip on the flashlight get slippery. After a few seconds, I stepped deeper into the corridor, checking behind boxes and looking under shelves. I didn't see anyone. My heart was pounding, and I felt like my breathing was louder than usual. I went back to the office and checked the cameras. The monitor showed a flicker on one of the sensors, but only for a split second. No clear shape, just a quick blur, then nothing. I stayed glued to the screen for a couple of minutes, waiting to see if whoever it was might come back. The sensor line stayed flat. Eventually, I chalked it up to my imagination, or maybe just an odd echo, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The second time it happened was a few nights later. Same hour. I was on my usual walk around the perimeter. I checked the fence line, walked behind the loading docks, and headed back toward the front office. When I entered the warehouse, I heard a noise that sounded like a soft scrape against concrete, like a shoe sliding for a second. I paused. I listened hard. Then the footsteps started. They were heavier this time, like boots. I turned quickly and shone my flashlight at the far end of the corridor. That's when I saw it. A dark figure. It was standing still, facing me. I couldn't see a face, just a silhouette. I stopped breathing for a second. I expected it to run or shout. It didn't do anything, it just stayed there, motionless. My heart was racing. My arms felt numb. I wanted to call out, but my throat felt tight. I forced myself to speak. "Hey!" My voice echoed. The figure didn't move. I took a step forward, shining the light directly at it. The shape seemed to flicker like the edges were unsteady. I blinked and moved the beam around, trying to focus. Then I walked closer, maybe 10 paces. By the time I reached the spot, it was gone. There was nothing but empty space. I circled around the area. I checked every corner. I looked behind stacks of boxes. I found no one. I felt a shiver in my arms like I was freezing, even though it wasn't cold inside the warehouse. I had this urge to run outside and call the police, but what would I say? That I saw a shadow? Back in the office, I reviewed the camera recordings. I only saw a series of brief flickers. The motion sensors popped up, one after another, as if something passed quickly in front of them. But I never got a clear image. It just looked like static. It made no sense. I know how animals look on these cameras. They don't trigger each sensor in perfect succession. This thing did. I replayed the footage multiple times, but it didn't help me understand it. The rest of my shift, I stayed alert. I walked around more often, expecting to find signs of a break-in. I checked all the locks on the doors leading out to the yard. Everything was secure. By the time the sun started to rise, my nerves were shot. From that night on, I couldn't relax. Every shift, I felt like something was watching me. I started hearing sounds, faint taps on metal shelves, a low scraping noise along the walls, and those footsteps. Sometimes they were soft, almost like bare feet on concrete. Other times they were louder, like heavy boots. I began to dread leaving the office. Even walking out into the main floor felt risky. I'd hold my flashlight tightly and scan every corner. I'd check behind pallets and bins, expecting someone to jump out. No one ever did. There were no signs of forced entry. No missing items. None of the daytime workers reported anything unusual. I mentioned these noises to one of the foremen, but he just shrugged and said the place was old. He told me not to worry about it. Eventually, I stopped talking to the staff about it because they treated it like a big joke. They'd say things like, "Watch out for the ghost," then laugh. I didn't think it was funny. I tried to keep track of the times I heard the footsteps or saw the flickers on camera. There was no clear pattern. Sometimes it happened close to midnight, other times after 3 a.m. Sometimes I'd go an entire shift without any disturbance, but that was rare. I started to lose sleep during the day. My routine fell apart because I kept waking up, remembering that still dark figure. One night I decided to walk the entire warehouse every hour on the dot. I wanted to prove to myself that it was just my nerves. So at 11 p.m., I did a full sweep of the place. I checked the storage rooms, the loading dock, and the corridor. I wrote down everything, nothing out of place. At midnight, I repeated the process. Still fine. By 1 a.m., I felt more relaxed. I thought, if I keep busy, maybe I won't imagine things. Then, around 1:30 a.m., while I was sitting in the office, I saw the light on the camera feed flicker. It jumped from camera 1 to camera 3 in a matter of seconds. That meant something moved from the south entrance near the loading dock straight to the main hallway without passing in front of camera 2. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed out. I could feel my pulse in my temples. My hands shook. I stepped into the hallway and immediately heard something move near the corner. It sounded like a quick shuffle. I hurried to the corner and shone my flashlight around. I caught a glimpse of what looked like a shoulder or part of a back, a shape turning into the next corridor. It wasn't a cat or a reflection. It looked like a person. I ran forward. My boots pounded on the concrete. The beams above me rattled with each step. When I turned the corner, I saw no one. It was just a dead-end area with some stacked plywood and metal pipes. No exit doors. There was nowhere to go. I walked around the stacks, expecting to corner someone. There was no one there. I felt a tight knot in my stomach. My breathing was quick and my legs felt weak. I tried to steady myself by leaning against a stack of plywood. My flashlight beam trembled. I listened for any sound, but all I heard was my own breathing. There was no explanation for how anyone could vanish in that space. That's when I realized I was truly scared. I wasn't just on edge anymore. I felt a deep, physical fear. My arms were tingling, and I wanted to leave. But I needed the job. I'm not exactly wealthy, and I can't afford to quit without notice. So I swallowed that feeling and stayed until morning. I didn't tell anyone about this specific incident because I knew they wouldn't believe me. They'd think I was crazy or lying. Over the next few weeks, it got worse. The footsteps came more often. Sometimes they sounded so close I'd spin around, expecting to see someone right behind me. I even tried installing an extra camera. I got a cheap webcam and placed it in an area I suspected the figure might pass through. It didn't capture anything but the occasional flicker of movement that vanished too fast to identify. Every time I stood in a corridor and waited, I felt like someone was approaching. But I never saw a clear face or heard a voice. It was always this silent presence that disappeared when I got too close. I remember one particular night. I was feeling restless. I kept pacing between the office and the storeroom. I checked my watch constantly. Around 3 a.m., I heard a loud clang, like a metal pipe dropping onto concrete. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The sound came from the far end of the main warehouse floor, near a stack of crates. I sprinted there, gripping my flashlight so hard my knuckles were white. When I arrived, I found a metal pipe rolling slowly on the floor. I traced it back to a shelf about 6 feet off the ground. It was positioned in a spot that wouldn't just fall on its own. Something must have knocked it down. I looked around, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. The place was still. Just the pipe rolling in slow circles until it stopped. My breath came in shallow bursts. I picked up the pipe and placed it back on the shelf. Then I spent the next hour walking every aisle, checking every door. I didn't find anyone. I can't explain these events with logic. I know what I feel. I feel a presence. It's like someone stands just around the corner listening to me walk and breathe. When I turn the corner, there's no one there. Some nights, I think I catch sight of a shape moving past a forklift or behind a row of pallets. But it's always quick, like a shadow. My skin prickles when I sense it. My heart starts pounding and my throat goes dry. I tell myself it's just my imagination. I try to think about practical matters, the next paycheck, the logs I need to fill, or what I'll do after my shift. But then I hear those steps again. I've tried playing music from my phone to break the silence, but it doesn't help. I end up pausing it every time I think I hear something over the songs. I try to ignore the random sounds, but I can't. Each time I worry that someone is messing with me or waiting to attack. I check the cameras more often, but all I see are the same bizarre flickers. There's nothing concrete to show the daytime manager. I suspect if I complain too much, they'll say I'm not fit for the job. One night after the figure appeared again at the end of a hallway, I decided to do a thorough search. I spent nearly 2 hours inspecting every room, opening every door, and shining my flashlight into every dark corner. I looked behind large crates, under tarps, inside containers, and behind old equipment. I found no signs of people living there or hiding. No footprints other than my own. No misplaced items. No scattered tools. Nothing that would indicate real intruders. But that feeling of being watched stayed with me the whole time. My heart pounded non-stop. By the end of that search, I was drenched in sweat. My clothes felt damp against my body. My legs were shaky. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see a tall shape behind me. The worst part is the silence. Whoever or whatever this thing is, it never talks or makes any vocal sound. Just footsteps or a subtle scraping noise. Sometimes it shifts boxes or knocks something off a shelf. But it never tries to communicate. It never fights back or reveals itself fully. It just lingers in the edges of my sight, a vague shape in the dimly lit corridors. I have no explanation for it. I only know that I feel sick with tension every time I step onto the warehouse floor. I still work here. I arrive at 10 p.m., lock the gate, check the doors, and settle in. I keep the lights on in most of the warehouse now, even though it wastes electricity. I need the extra visibility. It doesn't stop the footsteps, but it makes me feel slightly less vulnerable. Sometimes I think about walking away from this job, but I have bills to pay. I also keep wondering if maybe I'll catch this thing on camera clearly someday. Maybe that's why I stay. A part of me wants an answer. So far, I don't have one. I only know what I've seen and heard. I know that dark figure stood still, watching me, before disappearing without a trace. I know the pipes and boxes have been moved or knocked over when I'm the only one here. I know the cameras keep picking up strange flickers of motion that don't show up as a solid form. And I know that every time the shift starts, I feel a tightness in my chest and a tingle at the back of my neck, like someone is behind me. That's all I've got. I can't prove anything beyond that. But every night I still feel it. I do my rounds, I check the cameras, and I wait. It hasn't harmed me physically, and I haven't seen any evidence of break-ins or theft. Yet the tension is constant. The footsteps keep echoing in corridors that should be empty. And each time I rush over with my flashlight, I find nothing but darkness and silence. I leave in the morning with tight shoulders and a headache. I come back the next night, hoping it'll be quiet this time. But it never is. That presence is always there, just out of sight, reminding me that I'm not alone in this empty warehouse. And that's the story. I hear it. I see it in flickers. I feel it every time I step through those doors. It never speaks, never shows its face, never does anything except make me question my sanity. But it's there, and I can't ignore it. So I keep showing up, flashlight in hand, trying to do my job. That's my life right now, and that's as much as I know. I always thought my evening runs were my safe zone. I never expected them to turn into a source of stress. After work, I usually take this route that circles around the neighborhood and passes an old weaving factory. It's out of operation and pretty quiet. There's a fence around it, some rusted signs, broken windows here and there, and no sign of life inside. The place is always dark. The street lamps on that stretch are either too dim or completely dead. It's hard to see more than a few yards ahead at night. But I liked it because it's quiet. Fewer people around, less traffic, and nobody bothers me when I'm just trying to clear my head after a long day. That used to be my favorite part of the run, until a few weeks ago. One night I felt off. It was the first time I remember feeling like I wasn't alone. I was jogging, listening to my own breathing, trying to keep a steady pace. My footsteps echoed against the pavement. Usually that's the only noise I hear aside from the wind. But that night I kept thinking I heard another pair of footsteps. It was faint, and I couldn't tell if it was my imagination. Something about it made my skin crawl. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was probably an echo or maybe some random car a block away. But the feeling that I was being watched got stronger. My shoulders tightened. My jaw clenched. I felt a dull pressure in my stomach like I'd swallowed a rock. I decided to stop. I came to a halt, turned around fast and scanned the street. Nothing. It was empty. A few streetlights flickered. The fence around the factory looked the same as always. Rusted chain link, some barbed wire on top. I didn't see anything move in the shadows. My heartbeat was heavier than usual. My breathing felt unsteady. After a minute of standing there, I shook my head, gave a quick laugh to myself, and resumed the run. Nothing else happened that night. By the time I got home, I felt silly. I showered, ate a light dinner, and tried not to think about it. A couple of days later, I was on the same route. I passed by the factory again. The feeling of being watched came back. This time, it was more intense. My pulse jumped as soon as I turned onto the street that leads past that building. The sidewalk on that block is cracked, and there's usually some trash in the gutter. I heard my own feet hitting the ground, but once again, I swore I heard another set of steps behind me. That noise stopped whenever I slowed down. I turned around a few times. Each time there was no one there. It was quiet and still. I felt my throat tighten. There was a chill on the back of my neck, even though it wasn't a cold night. My hands got sweaty, so I wiped them on my shorts and tried to pick up the pace, just wanting to get away from that stretch of road. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the factory. It was in my head at work. I kept picturing it while typing emails. I couldn't tell if I was spooking myself for no reason or if there was something more. So that evening, I ran again. Same route. I was determined not to let my imagination get the better of me. But the feeling returned the second I stepped onto the block. The factory loomed to my right, tall windows, most of them busted or boarded up. Some graffiti on the walls. No visible lights inside. I moved along the sidewalk, keeping a faster pace, eyes scanning left and right. The uneasy feeling pressed down on me. My legs felt heavier than usual. My breathing was shallow. I caught myself glancing back repeatedly. Still, no one was there. After a few more nights of this, I got tired of the paranoia. I decided to check around the property. I climbed onto a concrete block next to the fence to see if I could look into the yard. I expected to see the usual debris, broken pallets, maybe some rusted machinery. Instead, I saw a flash of light inside the main building. It was a brief burst, like someone switched on a flashlight or some kind of small lamp. The moment I saw it, my chest tightened. There was no reason for anyone to be in there at that time of night. The place was supposedly abandoned. My pulse hammered in my ears. I yelled, "Hey!" reflexively. I had no plan. I just felt a surge of adrenaline and wanted some answer. The light shut off immediately. Then there was silence. No movement. I listened for footsteps or for doors scraping open. Nothing. I felt my skin prickle. My heart was racing. I realized I was holding onto the top of the fence so hard my knuckles hurt. After a minute, I jumped back down to the sidewalk and stood there, unsure of what to do. Eventually, I backed away and returned to my run, but my mind was racing. If someone was inside, they must have heard me. Why didn't they respond? The next day, I approached a security guard who works a block away, near a small office building. He's usually outside in the evening, patrolling around. I asked him casually if he's ever seen anyone around the old weaving factory. He looked at me with confusion. He said that place has been locked down for years. No electricity, no staff, nothing. He even said the property owner had trouble keeping intruders out at first, but that was over a decade ago. Now apparently no one bothers with the building. They have boards, locks, all that stuff. He shrugged and mentioned maybe some drifters sneak in. but he hadn't seen anything or anyone suspicious himself. He told me, "It's been quiet as far as I know." I thanked him and left, but I felt uneasy. The factory didn't feel quiet to me. That evening, I stood at the start of the block facing the structure from a distance. It was around 9 p.m., a bit cooler than usual. I could see the broken windows on the second floor reflecting a bit of the moonlight. I waited for a few minutes, just staring. Nothing moved, no lights inside. My stomach was tense and I almost didn't want to run past it, but I forced myself to do it. The run started normally. My shoes crunched on the pavement. A stray cat ran across the street. The building towered beside me, silent. Then the presence returned. It felt like someone was behind me, eyes locked on my back. I stopped. I turned around. Nothing but dimly lit street. My breath shook as I exhaled. I felt my arms tingling like my body was preparing to fight or run. I stood there for a moment, scanning every corner. Then I kept going, a bit faster than usual. I couldn't get the factory out of my head. A few nights later, I decided I'd investigate more thoroughly. I wasn't planning on breaking in or anything. I just wanted to look around the yard again, maybe peer through a window. So I came prepared. I brought a small flashlight, wore darker clothes, and tried to keep my footsteps as quiet as I could. Around 10 p.m., I arrived at the fence. The place was dark, no sign of anyone around. I looked for a gap or a loose section where I could maybe slip in. Eventually, I found a part of the fence where the chain link looked cut or pried open near the bottom. I crouched and slid inside carefully, hoping no one was watching. The yard was full of old crates, rusted metal rods, and weeds sprouting through cracked pavement. It smelled like dust and damp earth. The wind rustled through some plastic sheets stacked against a wall, making a faint rattling noise. I moved slowly, shining my flashlight around, trying to see if there were any footprints or fresh tire marks. I didn't notice any. My mouth felt dry. I kept swallowing, but my throat was tight. I stepped closer to the main building. The doors were boarded up with thick planks. I checked a small side door near what looked like a loading area. It was locked with a heavy chain. No luck there. I peeked through a gap in the boards. It was completely dark inside. A stale smell wafted out, a mix of old wood and possibly mold. I whispered, "Hello? Anyone here?" I don't know why I expected an answer. My voice echoed a bit in the emptiness. Nothing came back. I felt my heart pounding as I moved around the side of the building, looking for that second entrance or maybe a broken window at ground level. I found a small window with shattered glass near the corner. It was just big enough to peek through. I angled my flashlight inside and saw a room filled with dusty shelves and old equipment. A lot of it was covered in sheets or plastic. My hands shook a bit. I kept imagining a figure stepping into the flashlight beam. I held my breath and listened. At first, I heard only my own heartbeat in my ears. Then I picked up a faint scraping sound from deeper inside the factory. It was a soft, irregular noise, like something being dragged slowly. I couldn't tell where it came from exactly, but it made my entire body tense. The hair on my arm stood up. I felt a cold sweat forming on my forehead. I stood there frozen, shining my flashlight in all directions through the gap, trying to see movement. But the beam only showed the same dusty objects and shadows. A surge of fear hit me. I pictured someone lurking in the darkness watching me. I considered calling the police, but I didn't have a concrete reason aside from a weird noise. Also, I didn't feel like explaining why I was trespassing on private property. My pulse was going so fast I could hear it thumping in my ears. I forced myself to step back. I stood there for a moment, scanning the yard for any sign of life. Still nothing, no footsteps, no lights. But the factory felt occupied. It felt like someone was inside, waiting. I decided to leave. My body felt shaky. My mind was going through worst-case scenarios. I crouched down and slipped back out through the fence opening. My heart was still racing. I moved away from the property, sticking to the shadows, trying not to be seen by any passerby or security guard. Once I reached the main street, I jogged home. The entire way, I kept looking over my shoulder. I felt exposed. Over the next week, I avoided running by the factory. I chose a longer route through a better lit part of town. But each night, as soon as I got home, I'd catch myself thinking about the place. I'd wonder if the light was on again, or if someone was inside doing God knows what. Finally, my curiosity got the better of me, and I returned to my usual route. This time, it was a little earlier in the evening, around 8 p.m. I figured maybe I could pass by without feeling too spooked. The street was empty as always, but not pitch dark yet. I ran slowly, scanning the building. No lights on inside, no movement in the yard. The tension in my chest was still there, though, gripping me tight. I was halfway down the block when I heard a clang like metal hitting concrete. It came from behind the factory fence. I stopped dead in my tracks, adrenaline surging. I considered walking away, but something made me step up to the fence again and peer in. The yard was dimly lit by the last traces of daylight. I saw a silhouette near the side door. It looked like a person crouched down. My heart pounded. I was about to call out, but before I could, they moved inside through the side door. That door I thought was chained shut must have been opened somehow. The figure slipped in quickly. Then the yard was still. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but I stood there, rooted to the spot, trying to process what I'd just seen. I was sure it was a person, not some animal or random shadow. My stomach churned. I felt sweat run down the back of my neck. Eventually, I backed away, not wanting to draw attention. I didn't want to confront whoever was in there. I started running again, my legs feeling like lead. I kept glancing back until the factory was out of sight. That was the last time I tried to investigate. After that, I told myself I'd rather stick to a safer route. But each night, I still feel the urge to pass by and see if something new happens. I keep thinking about the flash of light, the silhouette, and the odd noises. Something is in there. Something that doesn't want to be seen. It's not my job to figure it out, though. I haven't contacted the authorities. Part of me feels guilty for leaving it alone, but I also can't handle the dread that hits me every time I get near that place. So now, I take a different path when I run. It's busier, more traffic, more people, and fewer shadows. I still feel edgy sometimes, wondering if I'm being followed, but nothing is as intense as it was on that lonely stretch by the old weaving factory. I can't forget what I saw, even if I never got a straight explanation. If anyone ever decides to check it out, I hope they're ready for that same suffocating tension. That place is locked down for a reason, or maybe it's just deserted and someone has their own reasons for sneaking around inside. Whatever the case, I'm done. My evening runs are supposed to clear my head, and I can't do that if I'm worried about what's lurking in that abandoned building. I still see the factory sometimes when I drive by in daylight. It looks harmless under the sun. Just a worn-out structure with broken windows and boarded-up doors. But at night it changes. And I know there's more to it than meets the eye. For now, I'll leave it at that. I have no proof of anything supernatural or criminal, but I have no doubt there's a presence in there. My gut told me enough times that something was off, and that's why I'm not going near that place again. I still remember the exact moment it all started. It was right after lunch on a Tuesday. The office was quiet, and the fluorescent lights made everything look a little too bright. Most people were still out, probably chatting in the break room or getting coffee down the hall. I was sitting at my desk in my cubicle, staring at a spreadsheet that was starting to give me a headache. The day felt ordinary, but something was off in the background. At first, I couldn't place it. Then I realized I felt uneasy, like someone else was in the room with me. I glanced around and saw no one. The aisles were empty. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner and the faint buzzing of overhead lights. I tried to ignore that feeling and kept working on my spreadsheet. My eyes were getting heavy because the afternoon slump was kicking in. Suddenly, I heard a soft scraping noise. It sounded like my own chair moving backward on the thin office carpet. I paused and looked down. The chair was actually shifting inch by inch away from my desk. It wasn't a big movement, but it was steady and unnatural. There was no breeze, and the air conditioner had never pushed my chair around like that before. I remember my heart rate shooting up and my palms feeling clammy. I didn't jump or make a sound. I just stared at that chair until it finally stopped moving. I didn't see anyone. I didn't see anything that could explain what I had just witnessed. For a few seconds, I just sat there, frozen. My mind raced, but I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the wheels were off balance. Maybe the floor wasn't even. But I knew that chair. I'd been using it for months and it never moved on its own. I reached out and pulled it back under my desk. My hands were shaking a little, but I tried to brush it off. I think part of me didn't want to deal with anything weird at that hour. I wanted to finish my spreadsheet and get home on time. I told myself that stress was messing with me. I got up to see if someone was playing a prank on me. I checked the neighboring cubicles, but no one was around. A few desks had personal items on them, like family photos or stress balls, but the computers were off, and the chairs were empty. The hallway was also empty. I listened for footsteps or any sign that a coworker might be hiding, but everything was quiet except for the faint hum of the building's ventilation. After a minute, I went back to my desk, feeling unsettled. I tried to push it to the back of my mind. The rest of that day passed without incident. I left the office feeling a little uneasy, but I thought maybe I was just tired. The next day, I arrived in the morning and everything seemed normal. My chair was where I left it. My computer was as I'd shut it down. I clocked in, opened my spreadsheets, and started my routine. I even laughed about the incident, thinking maybe my eyes had played a trick on me. But around mid-afternoon, something else happened. I was typing an email to a client when I suddenly heard a faint clicking sound. It sounded like someone was rapidly clicking a mouse. The noise came from a cubicle 2 rows behind mine. I knew that station was rarely used and the computer there was supposed to be off. I stopped typing and listened. The clicking continued for maybe 5 seconds, then stopped. I stood up and walked over. The monitor was dark. The tower under the desk was shut down, with no lights or fans running. The mouse was on the pad, motionless. I stared at it for a moment, feeling the hairs on my arms stand up. I even picked up the mouse and clicked a few times to see if maybe it was some leftover charge or something. It did nothing. The entire system was definitely off. After that, I started to pay more attention to odd noises. That wasn't the last time I heard clicks on unused stations. Over the next week, I would occasionally hear keyboard tapping or quick bursts of mouse clicks in corners of the office that were clearly unoccupied. Each time I got up and checked, and every time I found a silent workstation with a black screen. The first time it happened, I reported it to the IT team. I explained that maybe there was some glitch causing random signals or something along those lines. They ran diagnostics, tested the hardware, and found nothing unusual. They told me not to worry, but I couldn't help worrying. I found myself glancing around more often. I stopped working with headphones on because I was nervous about missing any strange sounds. Every time I heard a click or a tap, I felt my spine tingle. I kept telling myself this couldn't be real. It wasn't logical. But I also knew I wasn't imagining it. The anxiety was starting to affect me. I had trouble sleeping, and at the office, my concentration was shot. My productivity took a dive, and I found myself rushing home as soon as I could. Then came the day I went for a coffee break. It was late in the afternoon, maybe around 3 p.m. I had been feeling tense, so I wanted a cup of strong coffee to get me through the final stretch. Before leaving my desk, I saved my work and locked my computer. I remember double-checking because I was paranoid about losing my spreadsheets. I also made sure the system was indeed locked, and it showed the usual lock screen. Satisfied, I headed to the break room. In the hallway, I ran into a coworker who asked about the new project. We chatted for a couple of minutes, and then I continued to the coffee machine. I poured a cup, sipped it, and realized it was too hot. I stood there blowing on it until it was cool enough to drink without burning my tongue. Then I walked back to my cubicle. Everything looked the same at first glance, but when I sat down, my monitor was on, and there was a document open that I didn't recognize. I leaned closer and tried to figure out what the file was. It looked like a text document with some lines I couldn't understand. They weren't random letters, but they didn't form real words. They looked jumbled, almost like a corrupted file or something typed in a hurry. My immediate thought was that maybe I'd opened it by accident before locking my screen, but I knew I hadn't. I closed it without saving, feeling a cold sweat on my forehead. I checked my recent files and saw that the document had been created just a few minutes earlier, while I was away. The timestamp was there, mocking me. No one else had my password. My computer was locked. I couldn't explain it. That night, I asked the IT guys again to check if there was any sign of remote access or some kind of virus. They scanned everything, combed through the logs, and told me there was no sign of anything unusual. They even joked that maybe the office had a ghost. I forced a laugh, but I felt a pit in my stomach. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I couldn't deny something strange was happening. At that point, I started feeling a constant unease in that office. Even with all the lights on, something felt heavy in the air. I jumped at small sounds. I stopped staying late unless I absolutely had to. Over the following days, I noticed little details that made the situation even more bizarre. Sometimes I would leave my desk for a minute, just to grab a file or check something in a drawer across the room, and when I came back, my chair would be in a slightly different position. Not always, but enough to make me sure I hadn't imagined it. On a few occasions, I locked my screen and returned to find a random folder opened on my desktop. It never seemed to be anything important, but it was unsettling to know that this happened while no one else was around me. I started telling a couple of close coworkers about these incidents, but no one believed me at first. They teased me about working too hard or not getting enough sleep. Eventually, I convinced one of them, Marcus, to hang around with me after hours to see if we could catch something in action. We stayed one evening waiting quietly in the dimmed office. We heard nothing unusual for about half an hour. Then, around 7 p.m., we both heard a soft keyboard tapping sound from 2 rows away. Marcus looked at me with wide eyes. We walked over together and found the computer off, as usual. He checked the tower, cables, everything, all shut down. He looked spooked. He apologized for doubting me. That made me feel a little bit less crazy. At least someone else had heard it too. But that didn't solve the problem. It just confirmed I wasn't hallucinating. The next day, we told IT again. They checked everything again and came up empty. Eventually, I think they got tired of my requests. They said there was no evidence of tampering or infiltration. I was left with this strange pattern of unexplained noises, moving objects, and weird file openings. I started to dread going to the office. Each morning, I walked in with knots in my stomach, worried about what I might find that day. One afternoon, I had to finish a big report and stayed until everyone else was gone. The cleaning crew usually arrives around 6:30 p.m., and I saw them vacuuming in the distance. I was alone in my row of cubicles. The building was quiet except for the hum of the AC and the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner. My phone's battery had died, so I couldn't distract myself with music or anything. I tried to focus on my work, but the tension was making it impossible to concentrate. My back felt tight, and my neck was stiff. Every few minutes, I caught myself looking around, expecting something to move or some electronic noise to start up. That evening, while typing, I felt a sudden coldness behind me. The office temperature was usually stable, but I felt a distinct chill across my shoulders. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing there. There was no one. My chair felt like it had jerked slightly, as if touched by a light push. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I shut down my computer without even finishing the report. I grabbed my bag and left. I just couldn't stay in that environment any longer. I ended up finishing that report from home, connecting to the network remotely. But I had to go back the next day, and the feeling of dread never left me. Every time I approached my cubicle, I glanced to see if the chair was out of place or if my computer was on. Sometimes it was fine. Other times I found small things. A sticky note I hadn't written or the desktop folder arrangement changed. It was like someone was using my station without leaving any trace besides these small details. At one point, I considered asking my boss to move me to another workstation, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. I didn't have a good explanation other than telling him about the strange events. I guess I was worried that he might think I was losing it, so I kept my mouth shut. The days went on, and the situation didn't improve. I'd get occasional breaks when nothing weird happened for a while, and I would start to hope that it was over. Then something else would happen. Mouse clicks on a powered-down system, or a random window open on my monitor. It was never anything big, but the tension kept building. I felt like I was on high alert all the time. My work suffered. My relationships with coworkers got awkward because I was jumpy and easily startled. I barely slept at night, tossing and turning with anxiety. I kept replaying every incident in my head, trying to find a logical explanation. Eventually, I decided I couldn't live like that anymore. I went to HR and asked about transferring departments. They asked me why, and I just said it was personal reasons, that I needed a change of scene. They said they'd see what they could do. While I waited for a decision, I started taking more frequent breaks just to get away from my cubicle. Each time I stepped away, though, I felt that crawling sensation on my skin, like leaving the chair unattended would invite another one of those events. Sure enough, I'd come back to find something shifted or a new file opened. By the time they approved my department transfer, I was more relieved than excited. On my last day in that cubicle, I remember packing up my desk. I took down the few personal items I had, which wasn't much, and powered off my computer for the final time. I felt a small sense of victory, like I was escaping something. But even then, as I grabbed my bag, I heard a light scraping noise. I turned around and saw my chair tilt back slightly, just as it did that first afternoon. I didn't wait to see if it moved again. I picked up my stuff and walked away, my heart thumping in my chest. Since moving to a different section of the building, I haven't had any similar experiences. I'm more relaxed now, and my productivity has improved. Still, I can't stop thinking about what happened in that old cubicle. Sometimes when I pass by that row, I glance over my shoulder. I half expect to see the chair sliding on its own, or the screen lighting up with some random document. I haven't told many people about it. Most would just shrug it off or laugh. But I know something was there, messing with my workstation. Even now, when I think about the slow drag of the chair or the clicks on the silent keyboards, I feel chills. It's like there was someone in that space working quietly in the shadows whenever I turned my back. I can't prove it, but I lived it. And that feeling of being watched never really goes away. I still remember the first moment I walked into that old lobby. There was a stale smell in the air, and the front desk sat under a single light that flickered a little. I was tired from a long day of meetings, but something about that place felt off. I decided I didn't care. It was cheap, close to everything I needed, and I just wanted a bed. So I checked in. I had no clue I'd spend my nights hearing voices in an empty hallway. My name is Matt. I travel all the time for work, and I usually pick smaller hotels because I'm only there to sleep and shower. That night I arrived around 10 p.m. The clerk was a middle-aged guy in a wrinkled shirt. He told me they only had rooms on the third floor available. I shrugged and said that was fine. I signed the register, and he gave me an old-fashioned key instead of a key card. The room number was 312. I took the elevator up. It was one of those elevators with a noisy gate. It rattled the whole way, and I felt a slight jolt each time it passed another floor. The light inside was dull. I could see my reflection in the polished metal, and I noticed how tired I looked. When I reached the third floor, the doors opened into a long corridor that stretched in both directions. The carpet was brown and stained near the edges. The wallpaper was a faded cream color, peeling in some spots. It was quiet, too quiet. I could hear my own footsteps echoing as I walked toward my room. I found room 312 on the right side, near a small table with a dusty vase. The hall smelled like old sheets. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small, with a narrow bed against one wall and a single window on the other side. A heavy curtain covered it, keeping most of the street light out. There was a small chair by the window and a dresser with a mirror. The mirror looked cloudy, like it hadn't been cleaned well. There was a faint odor of old furniture. I tossed my suitcase on the bed and took off my jacket. After a quick check, I realized there was no bottled water, so I decided to get some from the bathroom faucet. I turned on the tap and waited a few seconds. The water came out with a bit of a hiss, then turned clear. It tasted metallic, but I was too tired to care. I brushed my teeth, got ready for bed, and turned off the lights. I lay there listening to the slight hum from the air vent. The old heater pipes clicked every so often. I closed my eyes. Around midnight, I woke up feeling thirsty again. The heater made the room stuffy. My throat was dry and I wanted more water. I sat up and rubbed my eyes. I was half asleep, but I heard something outside, like a whisper. It sounded like a soft voice, almost like someone chatting in another room. But the walls were thin, so I figured it was a neighbor. I got out of bed and stepped into the hallway. The corridor lights were dim. The whispering grew clearer, but I couldn't understand the words. They were low and mumbled, like someone talking to themselves. The sound seemed to come from the next room, 314. I looked at the door, but no light shone under it. The entire hallway was empty. I stood there for a few seconds, feeling a strange chill crawl up my back. Then, the whispering stopped. I walked to the bathroom at the end of the hall, got some water, and went back to my room. It took me a while to fall asleep. My mind kept replaying the soft voice, wondering if someone was pacing in the next room. I kept expecting to hear it again, but it stayed quiet. The next morning, I got up and went downstairs for a quick coffee in the lobby. The same clerk was there, looking half awake behind the desk. I asked if someone was staying in room 314, because I'd heard a voice. He stared at me for a few seconds, then shrugged. He said no one was booked in 314. He added that people sometimes complained about hearing talking at night, but they never found anyone. That was all he said. I waited for more explanation, but he just sipped his coffee and looked away. I felt uneasy. I shook it off and left for my meetings. The day passed quickly, and I got back to the hotel around 7 p.m. I grabbed a burger on the way and ate it in my room. The hallway was quiet again, and I tried not to think about the weird noise from the night before. I turned on the TV and flipped channels aimlessly. The reception was fuzzy. I finally settled on some local news station and let it play in the background. Around 10 p.m. I turned off the TV and decided to sleep. I left the bathroom light on with the door half closed because the room felt gloomy. I lay in bed, scrolling through my phone for a while before turning off the lamp. The mattress was a bit lumpy, and the pillows felt thin. I tossed and turned, but eventually drifted off. A few hours later, I opened my eyes to that same soft sound. My heart jumped. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The voice was coming from the hallway again. It was a quiet murmur, like someone having a private conversation right outside my door. I sat up, trying to breathe slowly, and listened. It never rose above a whisper, but it felt too close. I swung my legs off the bed and walked to the door. My mouth felt dry and my palms were a little sweaty. I leaned my ear against the door. The voice kept going, but I couldn't make out any clear words. It sounded like a single person, maybe a man, but it was impossible to be sure. I took a breath, unlocked the door, and opened it a crack. The hallway lights were still dim. The corridor looked empty. I opened the door all the way and stepped out. The sound faded to a barely audible mumble. I took a few steps toward room 314 and put my ear near the door. Nothing. I glanced in both directions. The long hallway was empty. I could see the elevator at one end, the red exit sign at the other, and some closed doors along the way. No movement at all. I returned to my room and locked the door. My arms felt tense, and I noticed my forehead was damp with sweat. I turned on the light, sat on the bed, and waited. About 5 minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was more muffled, almost like it was coming from inside the walls. I grabbed my phone and recorded a few seconds of the silence, hoping I'd catch the voice. But on playback, I heard nothing except my own breathing. That made me feel shaky. I wasn't imagining it, I was sure, but there was no proof. The next day, I told the clerk again. He gave me a small shrug and said, "We get that sometimes. Nobody ever finds out where it comes from." I pressed him for more details, but he didn't offer any. He just said it had been happening for years, and it was one of the reasons the rooms on the third floor stayed empty. I asked why they still rented them if it caused so many complaints. He said people usually only stayed a couple of nights, and the management didn't seem concerned. I tried to switch rooms, but everything else was booked because there was a big conference in town. At that point, I felt stuck. My company had paid for this hotel, and I didn't feel like paying for another on my own. I decided I'd try to deal with it. Maybe use earplugs, keep the TV on, and ignore it. But a part of me wanted to figure out what was going on. I hate strange problems I can't explain. That evening, I came back from another long day. I took a hot shower, ate some leftovers I'd stored in the mini fridge, and tried to get some work done on my laptop. The Wi-Fi was slow and the pages took forever to load. I eventually gave up. The entire building felt heavy, like there was a weight in the air. I could almost sense that as soon as I turned off the lights, the whispering would come back. Around midnight, I felt my eyelids drooping. I clicked off the lamp by the bed, then left the bathroom light on again. I didn't want total darkness. I closed my eyes, listening to the dull hum of the vent. It must have been an hour later when I heard it again. Quiet, constant chatter. It felt closer than the night before. I sat up, and my heart rate spiked. There was a pressure on my chest, like I couldn't get a deep breath. I tried to focus on the noise. My skin got goosebumps and the back of my neck felt cold. I got up and leaned against the door again. The whisper was right outside, as if someone stood there with their mouth near the door, muttering a low string of words. I suddenly felt angry. I swung the door open wide. Nobody. I looked left and right. The corridor was motionless. My anger turned into nervousness. I stood there in my pajamas, scanning the hallway. I even walked down to the window at the far end, just to see if anyone was hiding around the corner. I found nothing. All the doors were shut and the elevator was still on the first floor, according to the dial above it. My heart was pounding in my chest and I wanted to yell out, but I didn't want to wake other guests. I hurried back to my room and shut the door. I locked it and slid the chain across. My mind felt wired. I lay back in bed, but my muscles wouldn't relax. I kept looking at the door, half expecting it to open on its own. I tried to watch something on my phone, but the Wi-Fi was too weak. Eventually, I drifted off into a restless sleep. The final night I stayed there, I felt drained before I even got upstairs. My day had been stressful, and I was in no mood for more strange events. I got back to the hotel at 9 p.m., carrying a soda I bought from a nearby convenience store. I planned to stay awake until I was too exhausted to care about any noises. I sat on the bed and stared at the TV while sipping the soda. The channels were still fuzzy. The local news anchor mentioned a heat wave, but I barely listened. I checked my emails, but nothing important came in. At around 11:30 p.m., I heard faint footsteps in the hall. They stopped near my door. I felt a jolt of panic. I turned off the TV and listened. I heard a low whisper again, but now it was followed by a soft knock like fingertips tapping against wood. My heart thumped. I moved quietly toward the door, not sure if I should open it or stay put. The tapping continued for a few seconds. Then it went quiet. I stood there, my chest rising and falling with each quick breath. I waited. A minute passed, maybe two. Silence. I flicked the deadbolt and opened the door a crack. Nobody was there. The corridor lights flickered slightly. There was no sign of anyone. I whispered, "Hello?" but got no response. My voice echoed. I opened the door wider and stepped out. The entire hallway was empty, as usual. The air felt cold against my skin. I checked near the elevator, then walked back to my room. I locked the door one last time. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing small sounds, but they faded in and out. They didn't seem to come from one place. Sometimes it sounded like they were above me, sometimes in the hall, sometimes near the walls. By 5 a.m. I gave up. I packed my bag, showered, and went downstairs. I saw the clerk again, and he asked if I'd gotten any rest. I told him no, and he nodded like he'd heard the same complaint 100 times. He said sorry, but he looked tired too, like he was used to these conversations. I checked out and grabbed a cab to the airport. In the taxi, I tried to shake off the anxiety. My body was tense and my head hurt from lack of sleep. I glanced at the hotel entrance as we pulled away, noticing the dull windows and the old bricks. I felt relieved I was leaving. My mind kept replaying those whispers, but I decided not to dwell on it. I had a flight to catch and more work to do. That place still pops into my head sometimes. I think about those long hallways and that strange voice in the night. I know other people have heard it too. I won't go back there. I learned my lesson. Cheap rooms and good locations aren't worth that kind of worry. If I ever hear whispering through a wall again, I'm changing hotels no matter the cost. That third floor experience is enough for me. I still remember the first night I heard the knocking. I was in my bedroom sitting on my bed with my laptop open. My place was a large townhouse where I lived with 3 friends. We each had our own room, but we shared the kitchen and the living room. The house had 2 floors and my room was on the 2nd floor. The first time I heard those soft taps, I figured it was just the pipes in the walls or some random noise from outside. I shut my laptop, yawned, and tried to sleep. But the knocking went on for a little while, tapping in a steady rhythm that made me uneasy. The next morning I checked my closet. It was an old built-in closet with thick wooden doors. It smelled musty. There were no holes in it, no signs of rats or insects. I went around the sides, knocked a few times on the wood to see if anything scurried out, and I found nothing. I saw my documents in a small box on the shelf, along with a couple of old suitcases on the floor. Everything looked fine. I shrugged, grabbed some clothes, and continued my routine. I left the house for work. For a while the noise was faint. Sometimes late at night I'd hear a light tapping from inside that closet. I assumed it was the plumbing behind the walls. Our house was old. The stairs creaked when we stepped on certain spots. The floor would groan if it was windy outside. I didn't worry too much. My friends were usually downstairs or in their rooms. We'd watch TV in the living room sometimes, sharing beers and pizza. One of them asked if I'd heard anything strange at night, but I said I wasn't sure it was strange. It might have been normal house sounds. But over the weeks, the noise became harder to ignore. Sometimes I'd be lying in bed about to fall asleep, and I'd hear 3 or 4 knocks in quick succession. They sounded like someone rapping lightly on wood. I'd hold my breath for a second and wait. Then everything would go silent. My heart would slow down and I'd tell myself it was just the house settling. One night, I woke up around 3 in the morning. I had no idea why I was awake. My room was quiet except for my fan. Then I heard a dull thump from inside the closet. It was heavier than the soft knocks. I froze in place, staring at the closet door. My back felt tense. My eyes flicked toward the door handle, but it wasn't moving. I tried to calm down. Maybe something fell off the shelf. But when I checked the next morning, nothing was out of place. Eventually, my friends started talking about moving out. 2 of them wanted to get a smaller apartment. The other one had a job offer in another city. We were all on different schedules, and the townhouse felt too big for us. I decided I would stay a while longer because I had a good deal with the landlord. I didn't mind the space, and I liked the location near my job. I thought living alone might be a nice change of pace. That was before the knocking got more intense. After they moved out, the nights felt lonelier and quieter. I'd watch TV downstairs, but I kept feeling like I needed to check around every corner. The living room was dimly lit by a standing lamp. I kept the kitchen lights off to save electricity. The hall leading to the stairs felt strange at night, so I'd always flip on the switch before walking up. The floors would creak under my feet, and the house seemed to sigh with every step. I still heard knocking in the closet some nights, but it was usually faint. Then, about a week after I was alone, I had a night of insomnia. I couldn't settle down. I was thinking about work deadlines and some personal stuff. I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, listening to my fan. It was the middle of summer, but my room didn't cool down easily. I had no air conditioning, so I was relying on an open window and a small fan. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a soft tapping from inside the closet. It was slow and steady, like someone lightly knocking to get my attention. I felt a surge of adrenaline. My stomach tightened and my throat went dry. I tried to ignore it, but the taps became more deliberate. I sat up. My sheets were damp with sweat. I thought about putting on a light. Instead, I walked quietly to the closet door. My floor squeaked a little under my feet. I pressed my ear against the wood, holding my breath. I heard a faint tapping right on the other side. It sounded like knuckles on wood, except it was too gentle. I grabbed the doorknob and hesitated. My hand was trembling a bit. I turned it slowly and the door creaked open. At that moment, I felt a cold breeze brush against my face. It felt like air from an air-conditioned room, but I didn't have an AC anywhere in the house. It made me step back. My eyes scanned the inside. It was dark, so I turned on my phone's flashlight. I aimed it at the shelves and the suitcases. I saw no movement. I waved my hand inside, feeling for any draft, but nothing felt consistent. After a few seconds, the cold feeling disappeared, and the air felt muggy again. I backed away and closed the door, then sat on the edge of my bed. My heart was pounding. I rubbed my hands on my knees, trying to calm myself. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, just watching that closet door. I didn't hear any more knocks, and eventually, my alarm clock rang at 6. I got up, showered, and tried to shake off the weirdness. The next couple of days went by without major incidents. I still felt uneasy in my room. I'd enter and look at the closet right away. The memory of that cold air kept nagging me. I checked the closet walls, the back panel, the sides. I didn't see any gaps or vents. There was no direct path to the outside. I went around to the hallway, checked the walls there. Everything seemed solid. I told a coworker about it and he shrugged. He said old houses can have strange drafts. He didn't seem concerned. A few nights later, I was watching a show on my laptop. It was late, around midnight. I paused the show because I heard knocking from upstairs. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct. It sounded like knuckles on wood again 4 or 5 times, then a pause, then another set of knocks. My stomach twisted. I lowered the volume on my laptop and listened. The knocks continued. I stood up, left the living room, and climbed the stairs slowly. My heart was racing and I felt a light sweat on my forehead. The hallway light was on, and my bedroom door was open. I stepped inside. The knocks stopped. The closet door was shut, just as I'd left it. I walked over and grabbed the doorknob. I paused for a second, trying to decide if I really wanted to open it again. My hands were slightly clammy. My breathing was shallow. I turned the knob and opened the door. My nose twitched at the stale smell inside, but I didn't feel any cold air this time. It just felt stuffy and dark. I aimed my phone's flashlight inside. I checked the shelf, moved my documents aside, and looked behind the suitcases. I even tapped the back panel a few times. Everything seemed normal. I listened carefully for any noise, but it was silent. I closed the door. My hands were shaking, and I felt a tension in my neck. I went back downstairs, but I couldn't focus on my show anymore. I felt jumpy. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried to ignore it, but the knocks became part of my nightly routine. Sometimes they'd be brief. Sometimes they'd go on for a minute. I'd lie in bed, eyes locked on that closet, waiting to see if anything happened. My imagination ran wild, but I tried not to dwell on it. When I needed clothes from the closet, I'd open it quickly, grab what I needed, and close it right away. I started storing more of my things in the hallway closet just to avoid that one. One afternoon, I decided to be more thorough. I pulled everything out of that closet. I placed my documents in a cardboard box on my bed. I dragged out the suitcases and opened them. I wanted to make sure there were no animals or insects hiding inside. The suitcases were empty except for some old papers and a few receipts. I lifted them out of the room, set them near the door, and then started checking the wood panels inside. I tapped each area, checking for hollow spots. The interior was old but solid. There were no holes, no evidence of rodents. I got a screwdriver and tried to loosen a corner of the back panel to see if anything was behind it, but it was fixed in place. The nails were rusted, and the panel wouldn't budge without serious damage. I decided not to rip it out because it wasn't my house. I was just a tenant. I was alone with my thoughts that afternoon, and I felt my nerves were on edge. I wasn't hearing anything at the time, but I couldn't shake the memory of those knocks. That night, around 11 p.m., and I heard a steady thumping sound from the closet. It was louder than before. It sounded like someone knocking with their knuckles 3 times, pausing, then 3 more times. My pulse spiked, my face felt hot, and my legs trembled a little. I moved to the closet door, resting my hand on the doorknob. The knocks kept going. They were gentle, but firm. I felt sweat running down my back. I opened the door in one quick motion. I aimed a flashlight inside. I saw only the wooden interior. I stepped back, but I kept the door open. There was a heavy silence. The air felt normal, not cold, not warm. I stood there for a while, listening. My breathing was loud in my ears. After a minute, I reached out and tapped on the inside of the closet wall, just to see if anything responded. Nothing. I tapped again. Nothing. I slept with the closet door open that night. I wanted to see if anything moved or if I could catch something in the act. I turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and watched the darkness. My eyes kept adjusting, and every shape in the corner seemed suspicious. I stayed awake for hours, waiting for the knocks. Eventually, I drifted off. When I woke up, it was morning, and the closet was silent. That last month in the townhouse felt endless. Every evening, I'd come home from work, heat up dinner in the microwave, and watch TV alone. I felt on edge. The big empty house made every sound more noticeable. The plumbing would clang sometimes, and I'd jump up to see if it was coming from the closet. I started sleeping with a small lamp on. I tried earplugs, but I hated not being able to hear what was happening around me. The knocks didn't stop. Some nights they were faint. Other nights they were louder. Once I heard them around 4 a.m. and couldn't go back to sleep. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise. Toward the end of that month, my landlord told me someone else wanted to rent the place. He said I could move out earlier if I wanted. I didn't argue. I packed my boxes and called some friends to help me load everything into a small moving truck. On my last night, I was alone in the empty bedroom. The bed frame was gone, and I had only a sleeping bag on the floor. The closet was empty because I'd already packed my documents and suitcases. I told myself maybe the knocks would stop now that the closet was clear. But around midnight, I heard a soft tap from inside. It echoed in the bare room. My heart pounded, but I didn't bother opening the door. I just stared at it for a long time. The next morning, I left the keys on the kitchen table. I walked upstairs one last time and looked into my empty bedroom. The closet door was closed. The house was silent. I felt uneasy, but I also felt relieved to be leaving. I locked up and drove away. I moved to a smaller apartment in another neighborhood. It's been quiet here. I have a simple bedroom, a decent kitchen, and no built-in closet like that one. I haven't heard any strange knocking since. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that old closet. I remember the knocks, the cold air, and the tension in my chest whenever I stood by that door. I don't have any explanations. I only know what I heard and what I felt. I'm glad I don't live there anymore. That's all I really have to say about it. It was an unsettling time, and I'm not interested in going back. I never cared much about old buildings or rumors of strange things. But when I saw that ad for a cheap rental in an older part of town, I jumped at it. The landlord offered a low rent, and the place looked sturdy enough. I signed the lease without much thought. I just wanted my own space without burning through my savings. I had no idea I'd end up with nights of scratching sounds above my head and an attic door that seemed designed to keep something locked inside. I moved in on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The first thing I noticed was the front porch. It was wide and had a few loose boards. When I walked across it, I felt the boards give under my feet, and I wondered if the entire house was in similar shape. Once I got inside, though, everything seemed fine. The walls had peeling paint, but the floors were solid. There was a bit of a musty smell, like old books left out in a damp basement. I ignored it. Cheap rent was my only concern. I spent the next day unpacking, setting up the living room with a worn couch I'd bought from a thrift store. The kitchen was small, and some of the cabinet doors were crooked. Nothing major. The bedroom was decent. One window faced the street, and at night I could see the glow from a lone street lamp outside. The bathroom fixtures were old, but they worked. I figured I could live with a few quirks. On my second day there, I spotted a door near the hallway that led to the kitchen. It looked like any other closet door at first, but there was no handle, just a wooden panel nailed shut. I gave it a push and it didn't budge. It had 4 or 5 nails in place, plus 2 metal brackets. I realized it must be the attic access, but it was sealed up tight. At that point, I felt a small flutter of curiosity, but I didn't care enough to make a big deal of it. I mentioned the door to the landlord when he stopped by to drop off an extra set of keys. He just shrugged. He said it was best not to mess with it. I asked if there was anything valuable up there. He said no, nothing but old junk. Then he switched the topic to the garbage pickup schedule. It struck me as a little odd that he dodged further questions, but I decided not to push. I had more important things to deal with, like finding a better job and settling into a new neighborhood. That first week, the house felt okay. The place was quiet, and the neighbors kept to themselves. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch in the late afternoon, just watching the light fade behind the row of old houses. There weren't many people out in the street. A few cars passed now and then, but mostly it was silent. At night, though, I started hearing this faint scratching noise from above. It sounded like something thin dragging across a wooden surface. I figured it was rats or squirrels. The building was old, so that wouldn't surprise me. One morning, I went to the hardware store and bought some traps. I scattered them in the corners of the house and near any small holes I found. I placed one near the attic door, just in case something was finding its way down. I didn't catch anything. Over the next few days, I still heard that occasional scratching at night, like little claws scraping overhead. It stayed up there, never in the walls. At least, that's how it sounded. I tried to brush it off. I'd put in headphones and watch movies late into the night. But at times I swore I heard a heavier noise, like a thud or a dull knock. It was less frequent, but it got my attention. One night I was lying in bed, about to drift off, when I felt a faint vibration through the ceiling. It was rhythmic, almost like footsteps, but they dragged in a weird way. I felt my pulse quicken, but I tried to calm down. I told myself it was an animal searching for a place to nest. Still, my heart pounded. I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. That next morning, I decided to give the attic door another look. I examined the nails and the brackets. They looked newer than the rest of the house. The wood around them was worn, but the metal was shiny, as if someone had replaced them recently. I ran my hand along the seam of the door. It felt rough, and there was a slight gap where I could see a dark sliver of space. A draft of cool air hit my fingertips. I tried prying at one of the nails with the back of a hammer, but it wouldn't come loose easily. I remembered the landlord's warning and decided not to push my luck. Maybe it was just old boards shifting. That night, the noises got louder. I was in bed checking my phone when I heard a scraping sound that made the hair on my arm stand up. It wasn't just a small scratching. It was a longer drag, like something heavy moving against the floor above me. I sat up in bed, my heart thumping. The house was otherwise silent. I strained my ears. For a while, there was nothing. Then it happened again. A slow, dragging noise that almost pulsed through the ceiling. I got up, walked to the hallway, and stood beneath the attic door. I could see a faint outline of the edges in the dim light from the kitchen. I held my breath, waiting. My palms felt clammy, and I realized I was holding the doorknob to the bathroom with a tight grip. Then I heard a soft thump like something hitting the floor. Right after that, it stopped. Everything stayed quiet for the rest of the night, but I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions. Was there an animal? A person? Why was the landlord so secretive about it? The following day, I left a message for the landlord asking him to come by. He didn't call back. I tried not to dwell on it, but the memory of that dragging noise wouldn't leave me. I spent the afternoon cleaning the living room, hoping to take my mind off things. Every time I glanced at the ceiling, I felt a knot in my stomach. I turned on the TV to fill the silence. When night came, I was on edge. I lay in bed with the lights off, listening. Around midnight, the scraping returned. It lasted for only a few seconds at a time, then paused, then started again. Each time, it sounded like it moved from one side of the attic to the other. My chest felt tight and I realized I was clenching my jaw. After about an hour of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and headed to the attic door. I pulled out my phone to record any noise. If there was something up there, I wanted proof. As I approached the door, I heard a tiny creak from above. I held the flashlight in one hand, shining it up at the boards. I saw nothing but old wood and cobwebs on the surface. I ran my other hand along the door. I pushed it gently, and I felt the door give a little, but the nails and brackets held it in place. I thought about prying them out again. The house was quiet, though, so I backed away. I told myself if I heard anything else, I'd go for it. I hardly slept. In the morning, I found a note from the landlord on my kitchen counter. I must not have locked the door when I came back in. The note said, "Everything is fine. Please don't try to open the attic. I'll handle any issues." That was all. No signature, nothing else. I felt a chill run through me. It meant he had let himself in while I was asleep or out for a quick trip. And how did he know I was thinking about opening the attic? I called him. No answer. I left another message. I asked if he found signs of animals up there. I said I was worried about damage. I told him about the noises. He didn't return my call. I sat on the couch, feeling a little violated that he entered without telling me. At the same time, I was relieved. Maybe he would handle it. Maybe he'd send a pest control person. I tried to go about my day. I bought groceries and tried a local coffee shop. All the while, I felt uneasy. That night, the noise started around 11. This time, it was distinct footsteps, not just dragging. They were slow and steady, like someone pacing. My heart pounded. I turned on my flashlight again and went to the attic door. I could feel the vibrations through the floor. I raised the flashlight, aiming at the door, and I noticed something that made me swallow hard. The brackets weren't just nailed in. They were secured with thick screws from the inside. It looked like someone wanted to make sure nothing could push its way out. The pacing above me stopped abruptly, as if whatever was up there sensed I was standing below it. My mind raced with ideas. Maybe there was an animal, but animals didn't move like that. My hands shook. I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed a screwdriver, figuring I'd loosen the screws from the outside. But I couldn't get the right angle because the heads of the screws were inside. It was like the door was sealed from the attic side. I backed away, my heart hammering against my rib cage. I felt a little nauseous. I went to my bedroom, locked the door, and turned on a small lamp. I stayed up all night listening. At around 3 a.m., I heard another faint dragging sound. After that, everything was silent. When morning came, I called a buddy who lived about an hour away. I told him I needed help moving out. I didn't care about losing the deposit, I just wanted out of that house. My friend arrived by noon. I didn't give him too many details. I just said the place was creeping me out and the landlord wouldn't fix anything. He shrugged, helped me pack, and by evening, we had most of my stuff loaded into his truck. As we carried the last boxes out, we looked up at the attic door one more time. The brackets were still there, shiny and solid. My friend whistled softly when he saw the nails and screws. He asked me if I ever got a look inside. I said no, and I had no intention of finding out what was in there. He just shook his head. I locked up the house, left the key on the kitchen counter, and never went back. The landlord never called me. I never heard a word about breaking the lease or anything like that. I moved in with my friend for a few weeks while I searched for another place. Even now, when I think about that attic door, I feel tense. I remember the thumps and the dragging sounds. I think about the message the landlord left and how he seemed more worried about keeping that door sealed than about my comfort. Sometimes I wonder if someone else moved into that house and tried to pry open that attic. The idea makes my stomach twist, but I don't lose any sleep over it. I'm just glad I got out when I did. I can't explain what was going on. Maybe it was just some big animal trapped up there. Maybe it was something else entirely. I'll never know. All I can say is I'll never rent an old place without checking every corner first. The memory of that sealed attic door still makes my skin crawl, and I'm not going to risk stumbling into something like that again. I'd rather pay more for a place where I can see every inch and don't have to lie awake listening to whatever's trapped above my head. All I care about is that I got away and moved on. If there was something up there, it's still there. I'll leave it for someone else to discover. I didn't plan on getting scared during a simple getaway, but that's exactly what happened. On my second night at a secluded ranch, I ran into something I can't explain. I wasn't looking for trouble. I just wanted some air. But I saw a strange light on that dark road, and it still makes me uneasy whenever I think about it. I was on vacation from my regular job. I needed a break from the city, so I accepted an invitation to stay at a ranch owned by some acquaintances. The place sat at the end of a long, quiet road. When I arrived, I noticed how narrow the road was. The trees were close on both sides, and there were no streetlights after a certain point. My host, Silas, greeted me at the front gate. He drove an old pickup, and I followed him in my own car. I remember the gravel crunching under my tires as I pulled onto a little patch of dirt off to the side. It was around 3 in the afternoon, so we had enough daylight for him to show me around. The main house was a single-story structure with a covered porch. Silas introduced me to his wife, Marta. She told me to make myself at home. They had a small living room with a couch and a TV, a kitchen with simple appliances, and a couple of bedrooms. I got the spare one at the end of the hall. It had a bed, a small dresser, and a wooden chair in the corner. There was a thin curtain over the window. When I opened it, I could see the edge of the woods about 50 yards away. I unpacked my bag, changed into a clean shirt, and headed back to the main area. Silas asked if I wanted to see the rest of the ranch. We walked around the property. I saw a small barn off to the left side, a few pens for animals, and a chicken coop. Everything looked old and worn, but it was sturdy enough. The back of the property went downhill to a narrow creek. Beyond that, there were more trees and some fenced-off sections. Silas said they belonged to his neighbor. I remember the faint smell of cow manure drifting around, mixed with fresh grass and damp earth. It wasn't entirely unpleasant. In a weird way, it made me feel I was far from the city. That first evening, I ate dinner with Silas and Marta. We had grilled meat, beans, and some vegetables. It tasted good after the long drive. We chatted about ordinary stuff. They warned me about the limited lighting outside. They said if I needed to walk anywhere at night, I should bring a flashlight. There weren't many neighbors, and the nearest small town was about 20 minutes by car. I didn't plan on going out that night, so I shrugged it off. When night fell, the property got quiet. I heard crickets and the occasional rustling of some animal in the bushes. The wind picked up, and the trees made a soft shushing sound as they swayed. I stayed up until around 10, reading a book in the living room. Silas and Marta went to bed earlier. The house was dark except for the lamp next to me. Eventually, I got tired and headed to my room. I closed the door and lay down. The bed was comfortable enough. The silence felt thick. I could hear my own breathing, and a faint hum in my ears that sometimes happens when everything else is dead quiet. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, we had a light breakfast. Silas offered to show me a fishing spot near the creek. We took a pair of rods and some bait down to the water. The sun was strong. I wore a hat and old sneakers. We didn't catch anything big, just a couple of small fish we tossed back. Around noon, we returned to the house. Marta had made lunch, rice, vegetables, and some leftover meat from the previous night. After that, Silas left to run errands in town. Marta stayed behind to clean up the kitchen. I decided to walk around the property on my own. I followed a dirt path past the barn, trying to see where it led. It looped around and took me through a section of overgrown grass, then back near the chicken coop. I spotted a couple of old sheds that looked like they hadn't been used in years. One had a broken door leaning on its hinges. The afternoon passed without incident. By sundown, Silas came back. He seemed tired and asked if I wanted to drive into town for a drink. We ended up at a small bar with a few locals around. Everyone seemed friendly enough. Nobody mentioned anything weird or scary. We went back to the ranch around 9. As we pulled onto that final stretch of road, I couldn't help noticing how dark it was. The headlights cut through the darkness, but beyond that beam, everything disappeared into black. We parked near the house and I said goodnight to Silas and Marta. I went to my room, dropped onto the bed and felt restless. I guess I was used to city noise, and that deep countryside silence left my mind racing. Around 11, I decided I needed some fresh air. I grabbed a small flashlight I found in one of the kitchen drawers. I stepped outside, shutting the door behind me as quietly as possible. The porch light was on, but it was a weak bulb. The air smelled of damp grass and warm earth. I walked toward the front gate, passing the side of the house where a few flower pots were stacked near the wall. After about 20 yards, I reached the main gate. It was just an iron bar gate with a chain on it. I could see the dirt road stretching out beyond it. The moon was barely visible behind some clouds, so everything was pretty dark. I leaned on the gate, looking at the road. There was a soft rustling in the bushes behind me. Probably a small animal. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. That's when I saw the light in the distance. It looked like a single headlight, maybe from a motorcycle or a small scooter. It was a circular beam coming down the road, but the road was straight and empty. I listened for an engine, but there was nothing. No hum, no buzz, no rumble. Just the low chirp of insects and the breeze pushing through the trees. I stood there, gripping the gate. The light kept moving closer. It wasn't fast. It felt like it was cruising at a slow speed. I flicked off my flashlight because I wanted to see it more clearly. The beam of light looked steady. It didn't wobble or bounce like you'd expect from a bike on a rough road. There was no shape around it, no outline of a rider. After a few more seconds, the light dimmed and went out. Just like that. Gone. I didn't see it turn anywhere. It didn't fade gradually. It was there 1 second and gone the next. I stayed where I was, waiting for someone to come walking along. Maybe a guy with a flashlight would appear, but the road stayed dark. I heard nothing. I won't lie. I felt my heart thumping. My skin got clammy. My mind jumped to all sorts of explanations, but none of them made sense. I waited another minute or two, trying to stay calm. Then I turned on my flashlight again and aimed it up and down the road. Nothing. I tried to peer into the trees, but the flashlight beam only went so far. I ended up heading back to the house. My steps felt heavy, and I kept looking over my shoulder. When I got inside, the living room was quiet. I locked the door behind me. I shut off my flashlight and stood there in the dark, my ears straining for any sound outside. I heard nothing but my own heartbeat. Eventually, I crept to my bedroom and lay down. I had trouble falling asleep. I kept wondering if I should check again or tell Silas right away, but I decided to wait until morning. I stayed awake for at least another hour before I dozed off. The next morning at breakfast, I told Silas and Marta about the light. Silas gave me a serious look but didn't seem too shocked. He said they'd noticed a strange floating light on the road a few times. Marta nodded and said she'd seen it once a month earlier, but it was distant. Silas told me he'd gone out with a shotgun once, thinking maybe some trespasser was messing around, but he never found anyone. They had no idea who or what it could be. A few neighbors had mentioned seeing a lantern at night that moved as if carried by someone, but it disappeared when approached. They had no explanation. I felt a chill go through me. I asked if they'd ever heard footsteps or seen a person with that light. Silas said no. He'd only seen the glow. Marta admitted it made her uneasy. She suggested it might be a reflection of something or light from a passing vehicle on another road, but she also knew how the roads were laid out, and it didn't make sense. The place was too isolated, and there were no hills or mirrored surfaces around. That day, I tried to go about things normally. I helped Silas move a few fence posts, hammered some nails, and fed the animals. But the thought of that light stayed in my mind. I told Silas I wanted to see if it would appear again that night. He said I was free to check, but he wasn't sure if he wanted to join me. He admitted it made him feel uneasy, and he didn't like standing around in the dark waiting for something he couldn't explain. I understood that. I told him I'd let him know if I spotted anything. That evening we ate an early dinner. Silas turned in around 9. Marta followed him soon after. I stayed up, pacing around the living room, checking my watch every few minutes. By 10, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to see if the light would come back. I grabbed that same flashlight, put on a light jacket, and headed outside. The air felt cooler than the night before. A slight breeze made the hairs on my arms stand up. I walked to the gate again. I placed my hand on the iron bar and looked down the road. Total darkness. I switched off my flashlight and waited. My eyes adjusted after a while. The stars were out, but there wasn't much moonlight. The wind rustled the trees, and I smelled wet leaves and dirt. Every time I exhaled, I felt a slight tremor in my chest. I kept telling myself to stay calm. A few minutes passed. Then I saw it again. At first, it was just a faint glow in the distance. I narrowed my eyes, trying to see if it was a car. It grew brighter. It definitely looked like a single headlight. Again, no sound. Not even a whisper of an engine. My mouth went dry. My palms were sweaty on the gate. The light moved toward me at a slow pace, like the night before. I stayed put, my heart beating so hard I thought it might echo off the gate. The light got closer, but I couldn't see any detail around it. It was just that bright circular glow. Then, all at once, it blinked out. The road was dark again. I stared at the spot where it vanished, but there was nothing. No movement, no shape, no footsteps. I wanted to shout something, to call out and demand an answer, but my throat felt tight. I ended up turning on my flashlight and shining it into the darkness. It illuminated the dusty road for maybe 10 feet, and then it faded into black. I didn't see any tracks or any sign of a bike or a person. I opened the gate, making the chain rattle, and I stepped onto the road. My feet crunched on the gravel. I walked a few yards in the direction of the light. My skin tingled with anxiety. I kept looking around, half expecting someone to jump out of the bushes. But it was just me, my flashlight, and the night. No animals, no voices, nothing. After a minute, I felt a shiver run through my body, and I decided I didn't want to go any farther. I turned around, hurried back to the gate, locked it, and went into the house. I woke Silas and Marta and told them. Silas looked anxious. He said he'd heard enough stories from the neighbors to believe something strange was going on. Marta just wrapped herself in a robe, stared at the floor, and said she didn't understand it. We sat in the living room for a while, listening to the ticking of an old clock on the wall. None of us had a good explanation. Finally, we all went back to bed. For the rest of my stay, I couldn't relax. I thought about leaving early, but I also felt curious. I stayed another 2 nights. Both nights I stepped out to the gate around the same time. The light showed up once more on the final night. Same pattern, a bright beam moving along the road, no engine sound, then gone. I never heard footsteps or voices. I never saw a person. After I packed up and said my goodbyes, Silas asked me to let him know if I ever figured out what that light was. I promised I would, but I had no leads. I spoke to a neighbor on my way out. He just said he'd seen the light plenty of times and assumed it was some joker with a flashlight or lantern. But he could never catch them in the act. It never caused any damage, though it freaked out a few people who weren't expecting it. I drove away from the ranch, glancing in the rearview mirror. The dusty road behind me looked ordinary in the morning sun. No hint of anything out of place. Yet I felt a knot in my stomach. I still do. I can't explain it. It wasn't just a simple headlight. I'm sure of that. It moved too quietly and it vanished too cleanly. I keep telling myself there must be some ordinary explanation. Someone playing a prank or carrying around a lantern on that dark stretch of road. But until I have proof, all I have is the memory of that slow-moving beam and the silence that swallowed it up. And that's enough to keep me on edge whenever I think about those nights out there. I felt the first whisper against my ear on a Thursday morning. I was leaning over a binder full of old enrollment records in that cramped basement hallway. I had gone downstairs just to find some details for an upcoming report. My department didn't keep anything digital from before 2005, so I had no choice but to dig around in the musty corners of those shelves. The basement was always quiet, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. That day I heard a soft sound like someone breathing right behind me. It made my neck hairs stand on end, but I turned around and saw no one. All I saw was the long row of metal shelves and flickering bulbs above me. I shrugged it off and kept working. That was how it started. I've been working in this building for about 3 years. I help manage some administrative tasks for my department, and I coordinate research materials that faculty request. Most of the time, the main floors are noisy. Students come in and out, staff chatter by the elevators, and there's a steady buzz of activity. But downstairs, in that sub-basement level, everything is stale. People only go down there to find older books, boxes of files, or random equipment that no one uses anymore. The light is never as bright as it should be. The walls are a dull gray. Sometimes there's a faint smell of old paper or cleaning solution in the air. In the first few months of my job, I barely visited that sub-basement. Then I started going there more often because I needed to research archived documents. Faculty would request old test results or historical data. I got used to the narrow corridors and the low hum of the air conditioning units. I learned which shelves held the best-kept files and which corners tended to gather dust and dead spiders. The place was never welcoming, but it felt practical. It was quiet, and I could focus on my tasks without interruption. After a while, though, I started noticing small noises. Sometimes I'd hear a shuffle, like a shoe scraping the floor behind the next row of shelves. Or I'd hear a brief thump, like someone closing a book. I always assumed it was a coworker who slipped downstairs to find something. I'd call out, "Hey, you there? Need help with anything?" I never got an answer. When I walked over, I wouldn't see anyone. My gut said it was probably just the building's ventilation. It was an old structure, and old structures make weird sounds. I tried to ignore those sounds, but they started happening more often. One time I was scanning a thick folder full of scanned transcripts from the 1990s. The corridor light flickered above me, the way it always did. I caught a slight movement on my left, near the corner of my eye. It looked like a shadow passing across the floor. When I looked straight at it, there was nothing. I felt a sudden chill on my arms, like the temperature dropped. My heart beat faster for a few seconds. I told myself it was probably just my eyes playing tricks in the dim light. A week later, I heard my name spoken in a low voice. It was a short whisper. It wasn't even a clear word. It was more like the beginning of my name, drawn out in slow motion. I spun around with a jolt. Nobody was there. I scanned the corridor, walked down to the next shelf, checked behind a tall metal cabinet. Nothing. I felt my palms sweat and my chest tighten. My mind raced with thoughts about how to explain that sound. Maybe one of the staff had come down and whispered my name as a joke. But why would they do that? And why hide? I left the basement that day feeling uneasy. That night I stayed awake in bed, replaying that whisper in my head. It echoed in my memory like a broken record. I kept telling myself, it was nothing. The next morning, I went about my usual routine. I filed documents, answered emails, printed out some charts for a professor. Around 3 p.m., I had to go back to the basement. I didn't want to, but I needed to locate some old personnel files. I grabbed my flashlight because sometimes the overhead lights down there got even dimmer in the afternoons. When I reached the sub-basement, I took a deep breath. I told myself, get this done and get out. I walked along the main corridor, scanning the labels on the shelves. I found the section I needed. Right as I pulled a folder from the top shelf, the light above me flickered again. This time it went out for a full second. In that darkness, I felt a soft breath next to my ear. My heart skipped a beat. Then the light came back. I jumped away from the shelf. My flashlight clattered to the floor. My hand was trembling when I bent down to pick it up. I'm not someone who spooks easily. I've worked late nights on other campus buildings without feeling jumpy, but that breath felt real. I could almost feel the warmth of it against my cheek. My pulse was racing, and I noticed my throat had gone dry. I glanced around. The corridor was empty in both directions. I heard nothing but the distant hum of the air conditioning. I forced myself to keep searching through the files. I grabbed the documents I needed, shoved them under my arm, and walked out of there. The whole time I felt a tingling sensation at the back of my neck as if someone was standing too close. That evening, I considered talking to the administration or at least telling a coworker, but I felt embarrassed. I didn't have any proof of anything. It was just a feeling, a sound, a flickering light. I didn't want them to think I was imagining things or slacking off, so I stayed quiet. Over the next few months, the whispers happened more often. Sometimes I'd just hear a faint mumble, as if someone was talking to themselves on the other side of the bookshelf. Other times it sounded like a half-formed word right behind me, but I could never catch what it said. I'd spin around, flashlight in hand, but I never saw anything. My nerves were on edge. I started sweating more whenever I descended those stairs. I tried to limit my time in the sub-basement. If a professor asked me for something from the archives, I'd say, sure, but it might take a day or two. I'd hope they'd forget about it. I knew it was a bad strategy because I was letting my anxiety affect my work. But every time I set foot in that basement, I felt trapped. The corridors felt narrower. The lights seemed to dim faster. The air smelled like stale old books. But sometimes I caught a whiff of something more pungent, like damp cloth. My breathing grew shallow the moment I reached the bottom step. My body tensed up, anticipating the next whisper or flicker of movement. One morning, around 6 months after this all started, I thought I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, echoing from the far side of the basement. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice trembled, and I hated how weak I sounded. No one answered. I kept hearing the footsteps, so I decided to follow them. I turned a corner and saw the corridor stretch out about 50 feet, ending in a locked storage room. The footsteps sounded like they were coming from that direction. I walked slowly, my shoes squeaking on the floor. My hands felt cold and clammy. My heart was pounding so hard I heard it in my ears. When I reached the storage room door, the footsteps stopped. I tried the handle. It was locked. I pressed my ear against the door. I heard nothing. The hallway behind me was empty. The light above my head flickered twice, but it stayed on. I mumbled to myself, "There's nobody here." Still, I felt like someone was watching. I left in a hurry. I almost tripped going up the stairs. That same day, I decided to mention it to one of my coworkers. I didn't go into detail, but I asked if he ever heard weird sounds in the basement. He said, "Sometimes I hear the pipes rattling. It's an old building." I asked if he'd ever felt like someone was whispering or walking around. He gave me a puzzled look and said, "No, man. Maybe you're stressed." I let the subject drop because I didn't want to sound paranoid. A few weeks later, I was tasked with organizing a bunch of old textbooks that were taking up space in a corner of the sub-basement. They were rarely used. so the administration decided they either wanted them cataloged or recycled. I spent a full day down there sorting the books into different piles. By the afternoon, my back hurt from bending over so much. I was sweaty, and my mind was scattered. Around 4 p.m., I heard a familiar whisper. It sounded like it was coming from behind a tall stack of boxes. I tried to ignore it. I focused on my task, but my hands shook a bit as I grabbed each book. Then I heard it again, but clearer. It sounded like it was calling my name. I stood up. My knees felt weak. My stomach turned. I took a step toward the boxes. The light overhead flickered. I heard a gentle scrape as if someone was sliding a cardboard box across the floor. I peeked around the stack. No one was there. I felt my breathing grow faster. My vision seemed to blur for a second. I closed my eyes and told myself to calm down. Then I heard a soft exhale right behind me. I spun around, nearly dropping the book in my hand. There was nothing but a metal shelf and dusty volumes behind me. I couldn't handle it anymore. I rushed out of the sub-basement, leaving the books scattered. My coworker saw my face when I returned to the main floor. He asked, "You good? You look pale." I just nodded and said I needed a break. I went to the restroom and splashed cold water on my face. My heart wouldn't slow down for a while. At that point, I knew something was very wrong. I started avoiding the basement unless it was absolutely necessary. When professors asked me for old documents, I'd stall for as long as I could. If someone asked me to fetch a book from the sub-basement, I'd make up an excuse or drag a colleague with me. But no one wanted to stay there long, and they usually went back upstairs after a few minutes. Then I'd be alone again. I haven't told the administration. I don't feel comfortable explaining that I keep hearing whispers and breathing in a locked, supposedly empty space. Part of me wants them to investigate, to send maintenance workers to check for air leaks or hidden speakers or something that could explain these sounds. Another part of me is afraid they'll do an inspection, find nothing, and think I'm losing it. Right now, I'm caught between my job responsibilities and my need to feel safe. I can't just quit my job. I also can't deny that I'm terrified every time I step foot in that basement. Sometimes I try to reason it out. I tell myself it must be the ventilation system. Other times, I wonder if someone's been sneaking in. But I've never found any sign of forced entry or any trace of another person down there. I've considered recording audio on my phone when I go downstairs, just to prove to myself that I'm not imagining this. But the idea of capturing an actual whisper on playback scares me. It might confirm everything in a way I'm not ready to face. So for now, I just do my job as best as I can. If I have to go down, I go down quickly. I move fast, grab what I need, and leave. I don't linger. I try not to think about the shadows I see in my peripheral vision. I try not to focus on the flickering lights or the sudden chills that run down my arms. I still feel that presence behind me sometimes, like someone is watching from a foot away. I sometimes catch a soft rasping sound, like a quiet voice that can't form full words. I wonder if it's calling me, or if it's just echoing random noises. I have no idea if it means harm, or if it's simply there. But the not knowing drives me crazy. Every time I climb the stairs out of that basement, I feel relief wash over me. My legs usually feel like rubber, and I notice my shirt clinging to my back with sweat. I've managed to keep this experience to myself for months. I still don't know what to do. Sometimes I think about filing a complaint. Unexplained noises in the sub-basement. But I can't imagine that going over well. The administration would want specific details, or worse, they'd brush me off. So I stay quiet. When I do talk to coworkers about the basement, I keep it casual. I just say it's creepy or musty. They agree, but they don't seem to sense the same things I do. For now, I avoid being alone down there for too long. If I hear that whisper, I pretend I don't notice. I try not to let my mind wander. I keep telling myself it's just an old building with poor lighting and messed up acoustics. Deep down, though, I know there's something else. I feel it every time I walk past those shelves. And I'm not sure how much longer I can pretend it's all in my head. The next time I hear that whisper, I might finally run upstairs and tell someone. Or maybe I'll pack up my stuff and refuse to go back down. I haven't decided yet, but every day I feel that tension building. Sooner or later something has to give, and I'm scared of what might happen when it does. I realized something was wrong the first time I heard that grinding noise in the basement. It sounded like metal scraping across concrete, as if someone was trying to shove a heavy pipe along the floor. I was alone. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was supposed to be checking the electrical wiring. I remember pausing in the silence, holding my breath, and feeling every hair on my neck stand on end. I had bought this commercial space a few weeks earlier. It was an older building in a decent area. The price felt right, and I thought I could remodel it for a small retail shop, or maybe rent it out to a local business. During the walkthrough, the real estate agent didn't mention anything about a small garage in the basement. I didn't even notice it at first. After I signed the papers, I went back with a friend to measure some walls, and we found a narrow door behind a fuse box. It led to a set of concrete stairs going down into this hidden section. The door was rusty, and it creaked so much I thought the hinges might snap off. The air down there was stale and smelled like wet stone. I flicked on my phone's flashlight and took a look around. The garage space wasn't big. It might fit a single compact car or maybe a couple of motorcycles side by side. The floor was rough, with cracks running in all directions. There was mold along the walls, and some old tools were scattered in a corner. The place had no functional light fixture as far as I could tell. There was a small bulb socket, but the bulb was missing, and the wiring looked ancient. I didn't see any obvious reason to spend more time in that part of the property, so I mostly ignored it for the next few days. Then came the weekend when I decided to check the entire building's electrical system. I wanted to see if everything was up to code. I started in the main area near the entrance. I tested the switches, tried the outlets, and looked over the breaker box. Nothing seemed out of place. Eventually, I remembered that old garage in the basement. I grabbed my tools and headed down. The steps were uneven and some were cracked. My shoes slipped a bit on the damp surface. It felt a few degrees colder there, and the smell of mildew was much stronger. I walked around with my flashlight, shining it on the walls and ceiling. I saw a fuse panel in the corner, probably separate from the main breaker box. The metal cabinet was rusted on the edges, and I had to yank it open with a bit of force. Inside, the fuses were mismatched. Some looked older than me, and one was missing entirely. I muttered something about how unprofessional the previous owners must have been. That's when I heard the scraping sound. It was off to my left, near the far side of the garage, where an old shelf stood against the wall. It sounded like metal dragging on the concrete floor, slow and steady. My chest tightened. I turned my flashlight toward that shelf, but I saw nothing move. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed. I waited. No answer. The noise stopped. The only sound left was the faint dripping of water somewhere in the pipes overhead. I tried to convince myself it was just my own footsteps echoing, or maybe something shifting in the walls. I walked to the shelf, moved a few boxes aside, and checked behind it. There was nothing but damp concrete. I felt uneasy, but I went back to the fuse box. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it sounded a bit louder, like something heavier was being dragged. The noise made my skin crawl. I dropped my screwdriver and spun around. Still, there was no visible movement. I was alone, but it felt like I wasn't. I took a few slow steps around the perimeter, keeping my flashlight aimed where I thought the sound came from. The corners were dark, and the beam of light only cut through a small area at a time. My heart was pounding in my ears. I found nothing. Nobody was there. No objects had moved. I wanted to get out of that place. My legs felt stiff, and my hand was sweaty around the flashlight. Every step I took felt like it echoed. I left the basement and headed back up. I told myself it was probably the plumbing or a piece of scrap metal shifting on its own. Maybe the building was settling. I tried to shrug it off, but I couldn't let it go. I kept thinking about it all day. By the evening, I started wondering if someone had broken in, maybe a vagrant or a local thief. The building was old and I hadn't yet installed any updated locks. Could someone be hiding down there, using that space as a makeshift home? The thought bothered me a lot. I decided I'd go back the next day and do a thorough search. That night, I slept poorly. My mind replayed that scraping sound every time I started drifting off. I got up early the next morning, threw on some work clothes, and grabbed a more powerful flashlight. I also took a small crowbar, just in case I needed to pry open a locked door or scare off an intruder. When I reached the building, I parked right in front. The neighborhood was quiet. It was a Sunday morning and there weren't many people walking around. I unlocked the main door and headed straight to the basement. As soon as I opened the door to the downstairs area, I smelled that musty odor again. It made my nose itch. The stairs creaked under my weight and I tried to step lightly. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, shining my new flashlight around. The beam was stronger and cut through the darkness better than my phone's light had. The walls were bare, and the floor was covered in a thin layer of dust. I looked for footprints but only saw my own from the day before. I checked the shelf, the corners, behind the fuse box, and under the old tool bench. Nothing seemed disturbed. I stayed down there for at least half an hour, opening and closing everything I could find. I pulled the shelf away from the wall. I kicked aside some broken boards. I listened carefully, but there was no scraping sound. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. I didn't want it to happen again, but part of me wanted to catch whoever or whatever was causing it. Eventually, I decided to work on the fuse panel. I replaced the missing fuse, tested the circuits, and tried to ignore how cold it was on my arms. By the time I finished, it was almost lunchtime. I hadn't heard a thing the entire time. My stomach was rumbling, so I climbed the stairs to get some food. As I got halfway up, I heard a metallic scrape from below. It was so sudden that I nearly dropped my flashlight. I spun around and aimed the light down the stairs, but I only saw the empty concrete floor. My hands started shaking. That noise was real, and it came from the exact spot I had just been standing. I went back down. My throat felt dry. I called out, "If someone's down here, I'm calling the police." Silence. The air felt heavier than before. I made my way around the room again, checking every corner, shining my flashlight under everything. Nothing. The sound didn't repeat. After a few minutes, I gave up. My nerves were shot. I went back upstairs, locked the basement door, and left the building. Over the next few days, I tried to avoid going down there. I focused on repainting the upstairs walls, fixing some windows, and meeting with a potential contractor for flooring. But the basement kept nagging at me. Every time I walked past the door, I felt a chill. It was as if my body remembered that moment of hearing metal scraping on concrete, and it wanted me to stay away. The next weekend, I had to go back down. I needed to measure the space properly to see if I could store some supplies there. I didn't want to waste potential storage room just because of some weird noises. I put on a heavy jacket, brought a work light with a long extension cord, and made sure my phone was fully charged. I also carried a small pocket knife, more for my own peace of mind than anything else. I set up the work light on a hook near the fuse box. The light was bright enough to illuminate most of the garage. It flickered a bit, but stayed on. The brightness made me feel a little more secure. I started measuring the length and width of the space, writing down numbers on a clipboard. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting that noise at any second. It never happened. The only sounds were my footsteps and the occasional drip from the pipes. After about an hour, I finished my measurements. I wiped some sweat off my forehead. Even though it was cold, my nerves made me sweat. I was about to pack up when the work light flickered more intensely. It dimmed for a couple of seconds, then came back to full brightness. In that brief moment of dim light, I thought I saw a figure standing near the far wall. It was just a shape, like a person's silhouette. I froze. My heart thumped hard. I turned the flashlight in that direction, but there was no one. The wall was empty except for some peeling paint. I grabbed my work light and walked over to that spot. I shone the beam in every corner. Nothing. No footprints. No sign of anyone. I tried to calm my breathing. My hands were shaking again. The smell of mold was suffocating. I felt trapped in that place, like the walls were too close. I told myself it was just a shadow or my own reflection from a weird angle, but I could feel the goosebumps on my arms and the back of my neck. I hurried to gather my things. Right then, I heard the scraping sound, louder than before. It came from directly behind me. It sounded like something heavy dragging on the concrete. I whipped around so fast that I nearly dropped the work light. I saw nothing. My heart was racing, and I felt like I was going to be sick. I forced myself to walk slowly toward the stairs, not taking my eyes off the center of the garage. The noise didn't repeat. Once I reached the door, I turned off the lights, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Now, whenever I need to go down there for any reason, I feel the same tension building in my chest. My palms sweat, my pulse gets faster, and I can't stop looking over my shoulder. Sometimes I think I hear faint scraping sounds when I'm still at the top of the stairs. Other times I'll be halfway down and I'll swear I see something move out of the corner of my eye. Every single time I check and it's empty, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels like there's someone in the shadows waiting for me to leave, or maybe waiting for me to get closer. I've tried looking for obvious explanations. I checked the pipes to see if there was some loose joint that might make a scraping noise. I checked the walls for cracks big enough for animals to slip through. I checked the floors for shifting boards or metal plates. Nothing makes sense. Everything looks solid, just old and neglected. Sometimes I wonder if it's just in my head. I do feel stressed about the cost of renovations and the pressure to start making some money off this place. But I can't explain the things I've heard. I can't explain the figure I thought I saw. And I know I didn't imagine the sound of metal dragging across concrete. It's too distinct. It's not rattling pipes or dripping water. It's something else, and I can't figure out what. A few people have asked me how the new property is going, and I usually say, it's fine, needs a lot of work, or something like that. I haven't told them much about the basement. I'm not looking to be the guy with the haunted building or the weird garage. This city has enough rumors. Still, I'm not sure how to handle it. I've thought about installing security cameras down there, but the idea of seeing something on camera freaks me out more. I'm not sure I want proof of someone or something lurking in that darkness. For now, I keep the basement locked when I'm not using it. I've put a thicker padlock on the door and reinforced the frame. I rarely hear any noises from upstairs, but sometimes I think I catch a faint scraping when I'm alone, and the rest of the building is quiet. It sends a chill through my spine every time. It's gotten to the point where I hate walking past that door. I have no plans to break the basement into a rental space or anything like that. If I can avoid going down there, I do. When I can't, I move quickly, get whatever I need, and head right back up. My chest gets tight, and my ears strain to catch even the slightest sound. I leave the door open behind me to make sure I have a clear path out. The air feels cold, even if the temperature outside is warm. The smell of mold clings to my clothes after just a few minutes down there. That's where things stand. There's a hidden garage in the basement. It's dark, damp, and it smells like mildew. Strange scraping noises happen when I least expect them. Sometimes I see a shape or a flicker in the corner of my vision. There are moments when I almost believe someone is standing there, but I can never confirm it. The tension is exhausting. I don't know what to do about it. I only know that every time I set foot on those basement steps, I feel like I'm walking into a place I shouldn't be. And whenever I leave, I feel like something is watching me go. I still own the place and I still plan to use it. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone down there. I locked the door behind me every single morning. I checked the lock and jiggled the handle before I left. I wasn't the paranoid type, but I had a gut feeling something was off. Every time I came back, I noticed small things out of place. On the first day, It was a chair at a different angle. On the second, the coffee table had shifted an inch or two. On the third, the cabinet door was a little open when I remembered closing it. Nothing felt right in that flat, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't living there alone. I moved into that furnished flat because my own apartment was under renovation. The contractor said it would take 8 weeks, so I decided to rent a place nearby. It was a modest studio with a small living room, a kitchenette, a bedroom, and a narrow bathroom. All the furniture came with the rental: a small couch, a coffee table, a single armchair, a dining table with 2 chairs, a bed, and a wardrobe. Everything looked standard when I first saw it. The building had a modern lobby, a front desk, and a hallway lined with identical doors. My flat was on the 6th floor near the elevator. During the first week, I didn't notice anything odd. I was at work most of the day, and I came home too tired to pay attention. Then on a Friday evening, I sat on the couch, turned on the TV, and spotted the armchair at an odd angle. I was sure it had been closer to the window. I shrugged it off, though. Maybe the cleaner had moved it. The rental agreement said housekeeping would stop by once a week. I reminded myself I should check the schedule. That was my only explanation. Still, it bugged me. I got up, slid the chair back to its original position, and tried to forget about it. The next day, I woke up, made some coffee, and noticed the kitchen cabinet above the sink was half open. I usually shut everything, but I figured I could have missed that one. I closed it, brewed my coffee, and carried on with my morning. That night, I came back from a late shift and found the coffee table moved. It was about 2 feet closer to the couch. I stopped right at the door and stared at it. The cleaning service had come on Tuesday, and this was Saturday. I hadn't authorized any extra visits. My pulse sped up, and I felt a heaviness in my stomach. I walked around the table, crouched to see if there was anything under it, and found nothing. I sat on the couch, turned the TV on, and tried to relax. I kept glancing at the table and the locked door, wondering if I had done that unconsciously. I still managed to sleep, but I felt uneasy. On Monday, I asked the receptionist if someone had entered my unit during the weekend. She checked the digital logs. There was no record of anyone accessing it except me. I asked if the housekeeping staff came on Saturdays. She said no. I felt a chill. I forced a smile and went upstairs to my floor. I stepped into the flat and walked around. Everything looked normal at first glance. I went into the kitchen, opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and turned around. The bedroom door was open. I remembered leaving it closed. I stood there, bottle in hand, and stared at the empty bedroom. The bed was unmade, the wardrobe shut, and the curtains drawn. Nothing else seemed strange. I told myself I could have left the door open, but I couldn't shake the anxiety that was building in my chest. Later that same evening, I came out of the shower and started dressing in the bedroom. I heard a faint sound from the living room. It was a clicking noise, almost like the TV turning on. I hurried out with my shirt half buttoned. The TV was off, but the lamp next to the couch was on. I left that lamp off before going to shower. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I walked to the lamp, turned it off, and looked around. The windows were locked. The front door was shut. I checked the closet. Nothing. I checked under the couch. Nothing. I turned on all the lights, marched around the flat, and then sat down on the couch again. I felt my arms shaking. My mind raced. I tried to calm down by telling myself that maybe I'd turned on the lamp by accident. But deep down, I knew it didn't make sense. During the second week, I set up a tiny piece of paper on the top of my front door each morning. I wedged it between the door and the frame in a way that it would fall if someone opened the door. At night, I found the paper on the floor once. I called the receptionist. She insisted no one had used a key to enter. There was a camera in the hallway, but it only recorded footage at the elevator entrance. You couldn't see my door directly. She said maybe the paper fell off on its own. I knew that was possible, but I started suspecting someone had a different way in. Maybe a maintenance entrance or a connecting door. I didn't see anything in the flat that suggested a hidden doorway, but the entire place felt suffocating. I was tired at work because I wasn't sleeping well. I kept imagining someone creeping around while I was gone. Some nights I wondered if they were there even when I was home. One evening, I decided to come back earlier than usual without warning. I left work at noon, told my coworkers I had errands, and arrived at the building around 12:30 p.m. The hallway was quiet. I placed my ear against my own door. I heard nothing. I unlocked it and walked in slowly. I heard a door creak in the hallway that led to the bedroom and bathroom. It was a brief noise, like someone trying to close a door quietly. My throat tightened. I rushed down the hall. The bathroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and flipped on the light. Nothing. Just the shower, toilet, and sink. The bedroom door was open as well. I ran in, scanned the wardrobe, even opened drawers. No one was there. My head felt hot. I didn't see any sign of forced entry. I was sure I heard something, though. Maybe it was just the old hinges, but I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. That night, I brought home a small folding chair from work. I set it in the hallway outside the bedroom door, facing the bathroom. I sat there in the dark, holding my phone, and waited. Around midnight, I felt drowsy. My eyes were heavy, and my neck ached from leaning against the wall. At 1 a.m., I heard a soft thump coming from the living room. It sounded like someone bumping into a table or the couch. I jumped up and rushed over, phone flashlight on. Nobody was there. The couch looked fine. The table was in place, but the lamp was on again. I didn't remember turning it on. My skin prickled. I walked around, checking every corner. I ended up back in the hallway where I noticed the bedroom door was now half closed. I felt a rush of adrenaline. My heart was hammering. I pushed the door open, shining the phone light around. Still empty. I felt sweat running down my temples. I didn't sleep at all that night. The third week dragged on. I was jumpy at work. I double-checked every file because I couldn't concentrate. At home, I tried to record the flat with my phone placed on a shelf, but the battery would die before I could catch anything. I didn't have time to buy a security camera. My bank account was stretched thin because of the renovation. I started thinking I should break my lease, but I needed a place to stay until the contractor finished. Also, I felt like I had to find answers. I didn't want to walk away from this mystery. I wanted to know if I was imagining it or if someone was messing with me. One afternoon, I was in the hallway near the elevator when I heard movement coming from my flat's direction. There were footsteps on the other side of the door. I rushed to unlock it as quietly as I could, hoping to catch whoever was inside. As soon as I pushed the door open, I heard a squeak from the bedroom. I sprinted toward it. The door was shut. I grabbed the handle and yanked it open. The bedroom was empty. I opened the wardrobe, peered under the bed, opened the drawers, checked the small bedside table. I found nothing. My hands were trembling. I felt an ache in my chest from the tension. I went to the bathroom next. Empty. Then, I scoured the living room and the kitchenette. Everything was normal, except the armchair was in a different spot again. It faced the couch this time. I couldn't remember leaving it that way. Later that day, I went to the front desk and spoke to the receptionist again. I told her that things were moving in my flat. I asked if there was any chance a previous tenant still had a key. She said that was impossible, but she would check with management. She assured me that the locks had been changed recently. She maintained no one else had entered. I stood there staring at her, feeling a bitter taste in my mouth. I realized she either thought I was making it up or she didn't know what to say. I walked away feeling alone with my problem. That night, I tried a different tactic. I placed small objects in specific positions. I arranged my shoes against the wall near the door. I set a pen on the TV stand in a straight line. I put the kitchen chairs at exact angles. Then, I took pictures with my phone as reference. I left for a couple of hours, went to a bar near the building to kill time, and came back around 9 p.m. I compared the photos with what I saw. One of the shoes was off by a few inches and the pen was now crooked. My stomach twisted in knots. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anyone. I searched the place again, calling out, "Whoever you are, I know you're here," but got no response. My voice echoed against the bare walls. I felt my face burning with anger and fear. The fourth week started. I was exhausted. My boss told me to take a day off to rest. I stayed in the flat all day, refusing to leave even for groceries. I didn't see or hear anything until late afternoon. I went to the bathroom and left the bathroom door open. While I was washing my hands, I heard a soft click. It came from somewhere near the bedroom. I rushed out, water dripping from my fingers, and saw the bedroom door closing. I ran toward it, yanked it open, and stepped inside. Empty again. The wardrobe door was closed. I approached it, put my hand on the handle, and paused. My heart was pounding. I opened it in one swift motion. No one was there. I checked behind the hanging clothes. Nothing. I pulled out the dresser drawers one by one. They were shallow and no one could fit inside them. I was sweating and my breath was uneven. I felt trapped in a bizarre game of hide and seek where I never saw the other player. I spent the rest of the day pacing, checking behind doors, looking under the bed, and testing the windows. All locked and secured. At night, I decided to wedge a chair against the bedroom door while I slept. I dragged the dining chair over and pressed it under the door handle. Then I locked the bedroom window. I plugged my phone in and tried to relax. I turned off the lights. The faint glow from the street lamps came through the curtains. I lay there listening for any sound. Every tiny creak made me twitch. I tossed and turned, and around 3 a.m. I felt my eyelids finally getting heavy. I must have dozed off for a while, but I woke up to a dull thud. I jolted upright. My heart raced so hard it hurt. I turned on the bedside lamp and saw the chair in the same place. The door was still shut. I crept to the door and leaned my ear against it. I heard faint footsteps in the living room. I stood there, heart in my throat, unsure of what to do. I felt stuck. If I opened the door, I'd never catch them. They would slip away somehow, like they always did. But I couldn't just stay there. After a few minutes of heavy breathing and racing thoughts, I pulled the chair aside and opened the door. The living room was dark. No one was there. I turned on the lights, checking every inch of that space. Everything was calm except the coffee table had shifted again. Just an inch, but enough for me to notice. I wanted to scream. I realized this wasn't normal and I needed to leave. The next morning, I went to the construction site of my apartment and begged the contractor to hurry. I explained I had an urgent problem. I said I would pay extra if necessary. He agreed to try to finish in another week. I went back to the flat and started packing my stuff. Each night I slept with the lights on. I heard occasional faint sounds in the hallway, but I didn't bother investigating anymore. I just wanted out. On my last day there, I woke up early and hauled my suitcases to the door. I took one last walk through the empty rooms. The armchair was out of place again, facing the wall. The cabinet door was slightly open. I closed it softly and walked away. I never found out who was in there with me, if anyone was physically present at all. I still wonder if there was a hidden space I couldn't find. Maybe someone had a duplicate key. Maybe I was just exhausted and missing details. Even now, I'm not sure. I just know I left that flat and never looked back. My own apartment was finished the following week, and I moved in without telling anyone about my strange experience. I try not to dwell on it, but sometimes I recall that sense of being watched. Even in my new home, I check the doors twice before I go to bed. I still get nervous when I hear a creak in the hall. I can't forget those days in the flat. The thought that someone might have been there, moving furniture around, hiding just out of sight, still makes my skin crawl. I hope it stays a memory and nothing else. I moved into this old single-story house thinking I'd finally found a quiet place with a big backyard. That idea lasted exactly 1 week, until I heard the first strange sound outside. It was late, maybe close to midnight, and I was in the living room unpacking boxes when I heard what sounded like a shovel striking dirt. It wasn't a gentle rustle or a soft scrape. It was a clear, solid knock, metal hitting soil. I froze for a moment, wondering if there was someone messing around on my property. The house might have been old, but I'd never had any reason to worry about intruders in this new neighborhood until that moment. That's when everything changed. I stood there staring at the closed window. My heart was pounding in my ears. The sound came again. It was steady, like someone digging a hole with real effort. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back. The backyard was dark, and the small security light near the garage didn't illuminate much beyond a few feet. I couldn't see anyone or anything. Still, the noise continued. My stomach tightened. I opened the window a crack to listen more closely. The cool air brushed my face. The sound was very clear now. No doubt it was something metallic striking earth. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on some shoes, and unlocked the back door. I pushed it open slowly, trying not to make noise. As soon as the door clicked open, the digging sound stopped. I paused on the threshold, shining the light over the grass. Nothing moved. The yard was empty. The only noise I heard then was the buzzing of a distant streetlight. I stood there for a full minute, scanning the area, trying to see if maybe there was a person crouched behind the small garden bed or near the rundown shed in the corner. But there was no shape or outline indicating any human figure. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I stepped off the small concrete stoop and walked into the yard. The night air was chilly, and I felt the damp grass under my shoes. I took slow, careful steps. I circled around the yard, shining my flashlight on the ground to see if there were any fresh holes or piles of dirt. Nothing. The soil looked undisturbed. It was just the same patchy grass, some weeds, and the same old cracks in the earth. I felt uneasy, but I told myself it could have been a neighbor doing some weird late-night project. Maybe the sound was carrying over from another yard. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to put it out of my head. But I barely slept that night, because every little creak or bump made me jump. I got up late the next morning, feeling groggy, and checked the yard under daylight. I examined the whole area, expecting to find some sign of digging, but I saw nothing. The ground looked the same as before. No upturned soil, no footprints, nothing. Over the next few days, I tried to settle into my routine. I worked from home, sorted out some boxes, cleaned the musty corners of the house. Everything felt normal except for the tension in my stomach whenever I thought about that noise. Then, 4 nights after the first incident, I heard it again. This time I was in the bedroom folding laundry on my bed when the same metal-on-earth sound echoed from the backyard. It was a little earlier, around 11. My chest tightened. I set down the shirt I was folding, got up, and stood near the window. The noise was steady, maybe 3 or 4 strikes, then a pause, then more strikes. I moved the curtain aside, but it was too dark to see. I flicked on the flashlight on my phone, then decided to go out the back door again. The moment I turned the doorknob, the digging noise stopped. I stepped onto the stoop. Stillness. No sound at all. My hand holding the phone was shaking a bit. I aimed the light at every corner of the yard. It was empty. No people, no animals. I walked around for a bit, shining the phone's flashlight near the fence. The neighbor's place was quiet. I didn't hear any movement from their side, just the faint hum of their air conditioning unit. I felt my pulse thumping in my temples. I said nothing out loud, but in my head I kept thinking, "Who's there? Why are you stopping when I come out?" It made no sense. I leaned forward and pressed my palm against the ground. It felt cold, a bit moist from the evening dew, but not freshly dug. I sniffed the air, but there was no smell of turned earth. I stood up and looked around one more time. The yard was completely still. I went back inside, locked the door carefully, and double-checked all the windows. The next few nights I tried a different tactic. I stayed up waiting for the noise, but I kept the lights off and sat near the window in the dark. I stayed quiet, hoping to catch the sound and see something outside before it stopped. I drank coffee to stay awake. Midnight passed and I was yawning. Then 1 a.m. came and went. I got up to stretch my legs around 2 a.m., and that's when I heard it start again. that same rhythmic metal clank against dirt. I rushed to the window, careful not to make a noise. I tried to see if there was movement, but it was too dark. The security light only lit a small portion of the yard. The sound seemed to come from somewhere off to the left, near the fence. I kept staring, letting my eyes adjust. I squinted, leaning closer to the glass. I saw nothing but the faint outlines of the fence and the patchy grass. Still, the digging continued. It was slow and steady, maybe for 30 seconds. Then it stopped on its own. I stayed there holding my breath, waiting for it to start again, but it didn't. Night after night, the pattern repeated. The digging sound always started when I was inside. The second I made a move toward the door, it stopped. It was driving me up the wall. I tried searching the backyard thoroughly during the day. I raked through the top layer of soil in a few spots. I dug small holes to see if there was anything underneath. There was nothing unusual. The ground was full of old roots and rocks, but no sign of a fresh hole. The backyard fence was tall, and I didn't see any gaps where a person could slip in. The gate had a sturdy lock. I started to wonder if I was hearing an echo from a neighbor's yard, but the direction always seemed to be my own backyard. I even went around the block during the day, asking the next-door neighbors if they'd been doing late-night work. They looked at me like I was nuts and said no. I decided to buy a motion sensor floodlight. I installed it near the back fence, pointing it toward the center of the yard. I tested it at dusk, walking around until the light came on. It was bright and covered most of the backyard. I thought this would solve the problem. If there was someone sneaking in, the sensor would catch them. I felt a little better for a couple of nights, but then I heard the digging again. It was around the same time, maybe 11:30 at night. I waited in silence, hoping to see the floodlight snap on, but it never did. The digging continued for about a minute. I crept toward the back door, trying to open it slowly, but the door hinges squeaked. The second the door squeaked, the sound stopped. I looked out into the yard. The floodlight was off, meaning nothing had passed by the sensor. The yard was dark and still. I felt sweat dripping down my temple. My stomach was twisting into knots. I walked to the area beneath the new floodlight, scanning the ground. Nothing was disturbed. I looked at the sensor. It was powered and working. I tested it by walking back and forth. The light came on each time. That meant nothing had actually passed in front of it during the digging noises. It felt impossible. Unless someone was crouching in a blind spot, or somehow the sensor was failing at the exact moment of the digging, it made no sense. At that point I was losing sleep, so I decided I'd stay up all night on the porch. I made myself a thermos of coffee, grabbed a folding chair, and positioned myself near the back door. I turned off all the house lights to stay hidden in the shadows. Around midnight, the crickets were the only sounds I heard. I sat there, occasionally taking a sip of coffee. Time crawled by. My eyes got heavy, and my neck felt stiff. I stood up to stretch a couple of times. Eventually, I sat back down. The clock on my phone said 2:47 a.m. I was almost nodding off when I realized I'd heard nothing all night. No digging, no metal striking dirt, nothing. I forced myself to stay awake until dawn. Still nothing happened. Finally, the first light of morning made me squint. I felt drained and frustrated. I tried to push thoughts of the digging aside for a few days after that. I slept normally. I tried to go about my daily routine. But then it happened again. This time it was right after midnight. I was too tired to get up. I just lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, feeling my heartbeat thud. The metal on dirt sound was clear. After a few strikes, I sat up quickly and moved to the window, determined to see something. The moment I touched the curtain, it stopped. The back of my neck tingled. I felt anger welling up. It was like something was messing with me on purpose. But every time I walked outside or even got near the door, there was silence. One night, I tried keeping my phone's camera ready. The plan was to record the sound before it stopped. So when I heard it around 11 p.m., I hit record. I crept to the window holding my phone. But the second I got near the glass, there was no noise. I replayed the recording. All I heard was my own slow breathing. I couldn't catch the noise on any device. A few times I tried setting up a recording while I was out of the room, but it seemed like the sound only started when I was there to hear it in person. And it always ended when I made a move. I began second-guessing myself. I checked the basement, the attic, and the shed in the yard. I looked for any old pipes or mechanical systems that could make that kind of noise. The house's plumbing was ancient, but it didn't produce anything like a shovel striking the ground. Everything pointed to an outside source. I considered the possibility of an animal, but I couldn't think of any creature that would make such a consistent metallic sound. And if there was an animal, I would have expected to see some sign of digging or damage to the yard. The situation kept me on edge for weeks. I was sleeping worse every night, waking up at the slightest noise. My nerves were shot. I'd lie in bed, waiting for it. Sometimes I'd go 3 or 4 nights without hearing anything. Then, on the 5th night, it would return, same as before, the sound of a shovel hitting dirt. Always in the same spot, always around the same time, always stopping the moment I tried to catch it. I started feeling shaky during the day, and I'd drink too much coffee just to stay alert. My coworkers wondered why I sounded so tense in online meetings, but I didn't want to explain it. The few people I told assumed I was imagining things or maybe experiencing some echo or random house noise, but I knew what I heard. One evening, I invited a friend over just to have someone else witness it. We sat in the living room, lights off, quietly talking. We waited until late. He was skeptical. He asked if I was sure it was real. I told him to wait. The night dragged on, but that was one of the nights it decided not to happen. My friend left around 2 a.m., shaking his head. The next night, when I was alone, the digging returned right on schedule. I dashed to the back door, but the noise cut off the second I turned the knob. As time went on, the pattern never changed. I never saw anything, never caught anyone, never found any holes. The ground remained undisturbed every morning. My motion sensor light never detected any intruder. I replaced the batteries in all my flashlights, checked my security system, and even installed a second floodlight in the center of the yard. None of it helped. The sound always began out of nowhere and stopped as soon as I tried to investigate. I still live here. The noise hasn't gone away, but it's less frequent. Sometimes I can go a week without hearing it. Other times I hear it every night in a row. Even now, when I think about it, I feel a tightness in my chest. I don't talk about it much, I just deal with it. But there's always a moment late at night when I'm lying in bed and the memory of that metal-on-dirt sound creeps into my mind. My body tenses up. My breath catches. I wait, listening. Sometimes I hear a faint tap in the distance, but I can never be sure. Whether it's all in my head or something real out there, I can't escape the thought that something, or someone, is still digging. I never catch them, and they never leave a trace. It's the worst kind of mystery, the kind that hangs in the air and keeps you on edge. So I stay here, turning on every light at night, keeping my flashlight by the bed, and waiting for the next time I hear that damn shovel. I haven't found answers, and I might never find any. But I can't stop listening. It feels like this house was waiting to show me something from day one, and I can't shake the feeling that it's not done yet. I heard the first splash around midnight. It wasn't a soft drip or a gentle disturbance, it was loud and clear, like someone threw a heavy object into the water. My heartbeat kicked up, and I felt a tightness in my chest. Nobody should have been in the pool at that hour. The club was closed, and I was the only person on the premises. I walked over to the pool area, shining my flashlight along the edges, but I saw nothing. The water was flat and still. That was the night everything changed for me. I've worked as a caretaker at this sports club for a long time. It's an old building with a gym, a handful of locker rooms, and a covered pool in the back. People come here during the day to swim laps, play basketball, or lift weights. By 9 or 10 at night, they clear out, and I'm left alone to lock up. I don't mind the emptiness. I get some peace and quiet, and usually there's not much to worry about beyond making sure the doors are locked and the equipment is off. Every night, I follow the same routine. I start with the locker rooms, switch off the lights, check the showers for leaks, and then pass through the gym to confirm no one is hanging around. After that, I move on to the pool area. It's covered by a high ceiling and surrounded by large windows. Even at night, some streetlights outside cast a dim glow on the water. Usually it feels calm in there. Sometimes it's cold, and the smell of chlorine lingers in the air. But I never paid much attention to it. Not until the strange sound started. The first few times I heard splashes, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe a pipe was acting up, or the filtration system was cycling. Yet each time I rushed to the pool's edge, nothing looked out of place. The surface was motionless. There weren't any ripples, and there was certainly no one swimming. I began to doubt my sanity. I'd listen closely, waiting for another splash, but then everything would go silent. I'd hold my breath. Sometimes I thought I could smell a heavier chlorine odor when I got too close to the water, but I told myself that it was normal in a closed space. One night, though, the noise got so intense that I rushed for the light switch. I turned the overhead lights on, which took a few seconds to warm up. In that short time, I heard what sounded like a dive. A big one. I felt a rush of adrenaline and my legs tensed. I expected to see a person climbing out of the pool, or at least someone's head bobbing on the surface. The lights flickered on, illuminating the entire area. The pool was empty. The water was calm. My stomach lurched. My hands were shaking as I aimed my flashlight around, looking for any sign of an intruder. I checked all the doors. Everything was locked. The security cameras were on, so I headed to the small office near the entrance. I rewound the footage to see if I'd catch a glimpse of whoever was making those noises. On the video, I saw myself. I saw the water ripple a bit, but I didn't see anyone in the pool. No shadows, no figures, no movement that would suggest a person. That made me uneasy. I thought the system might have glitched, or maybe the angles were off. Still, it left me feeling jumpy. My palms were damp and my throat felt dry. After that night, I started approaching the pool with more caution. I'd slow down as I walked in, shining my flashlight around before stepping closer. The smell of chlorine seemed stronger each time. It made my nose burn. I'd stand there listening, my ears straining for any sign of a splash. Some nights I heard nothing. Other nights I caught a faint sound of water sloshing against the pool walls, but it stopped the moment I came too close. I tried talking about it with one of the maintenance guys during the day. He laughed it off, saying old buildings make weird noises. He suggested the water heater or the vent system might be causing random disturbances. It didn't sit right with me, but I had no proof of anything else. I still felt uneasy whenever I passed by that pool late at night, especially if the building was dead silent. The slightest sound made me jump. One evening I decided to do a more thorough check. After closing time, I locked all the doors. Then I went into the pool area and sat on one of the plastic chairs by the edge. I kept the main lights off, relying on my flashlight. The water looked dark and still, the overhead reflection faint. I forced myself to wait there for a few minutes, eyes fixed on the surface. At first, everything was peaceful. My own breathing was the only noise. Then I smelled chlorine more intensely. It felt like it was pushing into my nostrils. My eyes started to water. A few seconds later, I heard a low splash like an arm sweeping through the water. My heart thumped hard against my chest. I aimed the flashlight at the center of the pool. I saw a small ripple, just a gentle wave. It wasn't big, but it was enough to show that the water was moving. I stood up quickly, my muscles tight. I moved closer. The ripple disappeared. The surface was still again. I waited. Nothing else happened. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered that faint ripple in the water. I woke up in the middle of the night, sweating and thinking about it. I wondered if there was something in the pool, maybe some creature or a malfunctioning pool system. But when I checked the next day, everything looked normal. The pool's water chemistry was fine. The filtration system was clean. The maintenance records were up to date. A week passed with random noises here and there. Some nights were quiet. Others had small splashes or soft stirring in the water. Then came a night that escalated everything. I was finishing my rounds, about to lock up. The gym was empty, and the locker rooms were dark. I walked to the pool area last, as usual. I caught a whiff of a heavier chlorine smell as I approached. It pricked my nose, making me cough a bit. Inside, I shone my flashlight on the surface. I saw nothing but still water. Suddenly, I heard a loud splash right behind me. It startled me so much that I dropped my keys. They clattered on the tile floor. I whipped around, shining the light everywhere. My skin tingled. There was no one behind me, but that sound had been so close. I could still hear the water trickling at the edge. It was moving. I looked at the water. Small ripples were spreading out from a spot near the corner. My pulse pounded in my ears. I approached that corner. The smell of chlorine got even stronger, almost suffocating. I crouched down, trying to see if there was some kind of device under the surface. I couldn't see anything but clear water and the shadowy bottom of the pool. I tapped the water with the tip of my flashlight. It felt cold. The ripples subsided and the surface went flat again. I turned on the overhead lights, stood up, and scanned every inch of that pool. Nothing. My breathing was shallow and my hands were shaking. I ended up reviewing the camera footage again, and it was the same story. The water moved. I was right there, but no one else was in sight. The next day, I told the club manager. He nodded, but he seemed distracted. He said he'd check the system. I'm not sure if he really believed me, but he promised to have a look. I watched him test the water chemistry. Everything checked out. He tested the pumps and said they were all running properly. At the end of the day, he shrugged and told me to keep monitoring it. That didn't help my nerves. Over the next few weeks, I started dreading that final walk to the pool. I still did my job, but the tension in my stomach grew every time I neared that area at night. Some evenings I lingered in the locker rooms, hoping I wouldn't hear another splash. It was hard to explain. The feeling in the pool area wasn't just about hearing sounds. I felt like someone was there, watching me from the water. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see a figure in the dark, but I never saw anyone. One night I felt a sudden drop in temperature when I stepped into the pool area. The rest of the building was at a normal temperature, but that section felt chilly. Goosebumps rose on my arms. My eyes started to water again from the strong chlorine smell, or maybe from nerves. I heard a single drip of water, then a short splash. Not loud, but noticeable. I froze. My mind raced and I considered turning around and leaving. But I had a job to do, so I forced myself to walk along the edge, shining my flashlight. Each step made the tiles squeak under my shoes. My mouth was dry and I could hear my own breathing. At the far corner of the pool, I paused. The water seemed to stir. I saw tiny ripples. They spread outward in a slow pattern, then disappeared. I bent down, keeping my light fixed on that spot. I didn't see anything that could have caused it. The water was clear. My reflection trembled on the surface, but there was nothing else. My heart hammered against my ribs. I inched closer, half expecting something to grab my wrist. But I only felt cold air and smelled chlorine. I stood there for a minute waiting, but nothing else happened. Eventually, I stepped away and checked the rest of the area. Then I left. My legs felt shaky, and my face was covered in sweat. That entire night, I kept thinking about what I'd do if I ever saw someone or something in the water. I didn't have an answer. I knew there was probably a rational explanation. Maybe air bubbles in the filtration lines or random pressure changes in the pipes. But a small voice in the back of my head said it felt more personal than that. I never told anyone that part. One evening, I decided to keep the bright lights on during my entire final sweep. I reasoned that if I could see everything clearly, I'd stop getting scared by little noises. It didn't help. The pool looked almost too bright, and I had nowhere to hide from that silent tension. The smell of chlorine was still too strong. I got through my checks more quickly than usual just so I could get out of there. On the way home, I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles were white. During the day, the pool was normal. People swam laps, chatted by the benches, and sometimes played around. Nobody reported seeing anything unusual. The only time the disturbances happened was when I was alone at night. I started to question my own senses. I cut back on coffee, thinking maybe it was making me jumpy. I tried to relax, but the feeling of being watched never went away. A few nights later, I was finishing up as usual. The building felt colder than normal. My jacket didn't seem to help. I walked into the pool area slowly, scanning for anything out of place. At first, I saw nothing. Then I heard a quick splash, like a hand smacking the surface of the water. I whipped my flashlight toward the sound. The water moved. I saw ripples, but they faded fast. A lump formed in my throat. I took 2 steps back, ready to bolt, but I forced myself to stay calm. I said, "Hello?" My voice echoed a bit in the open space. No one answered. I listened for a moment, but all I heard was the faint hum of the ventilation system. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I moved closer to the water. Another faint splash sounded near the middle. When I pointed my flashlight there, the water was still. I tried to ignore the panic rising in me. I looked around the perimeter, searching for a clue. A window left open, a door ajar. Everything was secured. That was when I felt certain I wasn't alone. I couldn't see anyone, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned around quickly, shining the flashlight behind me. The smell of chlorine hit me hard, almost stinging my eyes. I didn't see a person or an animal. The place was empty. My stomach twisted. I wanted to get out. My nerves were shot. My arms felt weak. I forced myself to do one last inspection. I walked around the entire pool deck, checking the water's edge. I saw my reflection in it, but it looked distorted by the overhead lights. I didn't linger. I hurried out, locked the doors, and headed straight for my car. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. Even at traffic lights, I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone in the back seat. Now, every time I enter the pool area late at night, my heart speeds up. My hands sweat. I keep my flashlight on even if I turn on the main lights. The chlorine smell is always stronger than during the day. When I move around the edges of the pool, I feel a slight chill even on warm evenings. Some nights, the sounds are mild, just a small ripple or a soft splash. Other nights, it's loud enough to make me drop what I'm holding. No matter how many times I check the cameras, I never see anyone else in there. I've grown to expect it, though I still can't explain it. I just know that when I walk by that water, I sense something. It's quiet, but it feels like it's watching me, maybe from below the surface. I haven't told many people because I doubt they'd believe me, but it's real enough to make me uneasy every single night. I can't ignore it anymore. All I can do is finish my rounds, lock up, and try to sleep, wondering if the next time I hear that splash, I'll finally see whoever, or whatever, is in there. That's the story. No one has been hurt, and there are no signs of actual break-ins. Yet the sounds continue, and the water stirs at odd times. I keep doing my job because I have bills to pay. But every time I step into that dimly lit area, I feel that prickle on my skin and that tightness in my gut. The smell of chlorine hits me, stronger than ever, and I sense those unseen eyes from inside the water. I don't have answers, and I'm not sure I ever will. All I know is when the night is quiet, the sound of splashing water echoes through my mind, and I can't shake the feeling that something in that pool is paying attention to me. I'm not the type of person who scares easily, but something about that empty store next to mine makes my stomach tighten every time I walk by. I remember my first day renting my new space. I felt proud and ready to open my small shop on a busy avenue. But on that same day, I noticed the neighboring storefront with its dusty windows and missing signage. Someone told me the owner vanished without notice months ago. At first, I just saw an abandoned space with a few broken shelves inside. Now I can't even glance at that place without feeling my skin crawl. I run a small office supply shop. It's not huge, but it has enough shelves for printer paper, pens, and staplers. I keep a few display racks near the front window. My customers are a mix of students from a technical school nearby and a few office workers from around the block. My schedule is straightforward. Open at 9, close at 7. It's a good location, and I get a decent amount of foot traffic. Even so, every time I step outside around midday, I find myself glancing toward that abandoned store. I don't have a logical reason for doing it. Maybe I just wonder if someone finally came to clean it up. But it always looks the same. Dirty windows, a couple of tilted shelves, old posters peeling off the glass. During the day, I see dust floating in the sunlight when I try to peek inside. Occasionally, I can make out a few empty boxes on the floor. There's something about those boxes. Some are open, some are sealed, but they never move. At least not when I check during daylight. Sometimes I see footprints in the dust near the entrance, but I can't be sure if they're mine, a previous tenant's, or some random person who stood too close to the door. Usually, I don't linger too long. I open my shop, greet customers, restock merchandise, and focus on my own stuff. But at night, things change. I close my store around 7. By then, the avenue is less busy, but still not deserted. Often, I see people rushing to catch a bus or heading to a nearby cafe. I have a metal gate that rolls down over my glass door. Once I lock it, I turn to the left and head toward my car, which I park about a block away. That's when I pass in front of the empty store. The faint glow of the streetlights hits its window at an angle, making it hard to see inside clearly. I only see vague shapes, the outlines of shelves and those dusty boxes. Even so, I get a slight chill. My arms tense and I move a bit faster. 2 weeks into my lease, I started noticing weird flashes of light when I walked by at night. It's not like a bright flash, more like a glow or a flicker, similar to the light from a phone screen turning on in a dark room. I remember one evening, I closed up as usual and walked past. I saw a brief flicker as though someone turned on a small flashlight and then switched it off. I stopped for a second, staring at that empty window. My heart began to beat faster. I listened for any noise, but all I heard was distant traffic and a car horn a few blocks away. I considered pushing my face against the glass to see better, but I felt a knot in my chest that kept me from getting closer. I just walked away, telling myself it was a reflection or maybe a passing car's headlights. After that, I caught myself rushing every night. I started double-checking my door alarm as quickly as possible so I could hurry to my car without looking at that store. But ignoring it didn't help. The next time I forced myself to glance inside at night, the hair on my neck stood on end. I could have sworn I saw a small flicker near the back of the store, like someone tapping a phone screen. It was just a fraction of a second, but my breath caught in my throat. I tried not to panic. Maybe a homeless person had found a way in. That was my logical guess. But the windows and doors still seemed locked. There were no obvious signs that anyone had pried open a door. One evening, around 8:30, I stayed late doing inventory. I had to recount some printer cartridges after a small shipping mistake. By the time I was done, my back ached. I locked the shop, rolled down the gate, and looked at the empty store again. This time, I felt more frustrated than scared. If someone was squatting there, maybe I should contact the landlord or the police. I walked closer to the window, pressing my hand against the glass to steady myself. The surface felt grimy. I tried to see inside, but it was pitch black. I couldn't pick out any movement. Then I heard a quick scraping sound, like something sliding across the floor. I jumped back, bumping into my own metal gate. My heart pounded. I'm not proud of it, but I turned and walked away without investigating further. The worst moment happened a few days later. I closed up at 10 at night because I had stayed to organize a new shipment. I was in a rush, but I realized I'd forgotten a folder of invoices I needed to review at home. So I locked the door, started walking away, and then cursed under my breath. I had to go back. My car was parked farther that evening because the usual spot was taken, so I had my keys in hand as I approached my shop again. While I passed in front of the empty store, I heard a loud thump. It sounded like a heavy box falling from a shelf. I froze in my tracks. My mouth felt dry. The street was mostly empty, except for a single streetlight flickering about 10 feet away. I looked through the dirty window, trying to see if someone was in there. All I saw was darkness and a few faint outlines. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my neck. I held my breath, leaning forward to look deeper into the store. That's when my eyes focused on a corner in the back. It was just a dark shape at first, like a shadow on the wall, but it shifted. I can't describe it as a person exactly, because I didn't see any clear form. It looked more like a patch of darkness that moved. I gasped. My skin tingled, and I felt a burst of cold sweat across my forehead. I considered calling the police. My phone was in my pocket, but I stood there, hesitating. I didn't see an actual person, and I saw no sign of broken glass or forced entry. For a second, I tried to convince myself it was my own reflection or some weird trick of the light. My throat felt tight, and my legs felt weak. I stepped away from the window and glanced around. No one else was on the sidewalk, and no one was in sight. I felt alone and uneasy. I told myself I should at least check my own store before going inside. I hurried to my door, unlocked it, and grabbed the folder I needed. I locked up again in record time and avoided looking at the empty store as I headed to my car. That entire drive home, I felt tense. My arms were stiff on the steering wheel, and I kept replaying that shadow in my head. Over the next few days, I tried to keep my schedule normal. I opened at 9, helped customers, made small talk with a regular who always buys notebooks for his office. But my mind kept drifting to that store next door. I even asked a delivery guy if he knew anything about the missing owner. He shrugged and said he'd heard the man had personal problems and left town. No one had seen him for months. When I mentioned the possibility of someone sneaking around inside, the delivery guy just gave me an odd look and said, "Maybe it's just a reflection." That didn't make me feel better. I started closing a bit earlier some nights, telling customers I had errands. It was just an excuse to avoid walking by that place when it was too dark. Still, occasionally I stayed late, and whenever I stepped outside, I checked that storefront. Sometimes I saw a faint glow. Sometimes I heard nothing. Sometimes I heard a soft click or a scrape. It was never loud enough to be sure. One time I called out from the sidewalk, "Hey, is anyone in there?" My voice trembled more than I cared to admit. No one answered. I waited a moment, heard nothing, and left. After a month of this, I got tired of feeling paranoid. I decided to do something about it. One afternoon, I tried calling the landlord I rent from, but he told me he has no contact for that store's owner. He only knows someone else who used to manage the property, but apparently that person had no clue about the current situation either. I told the landlord about the noises and lights. He sounded concerned, but said there wasn't much he could do. He advised me to call the police if I felt threatened. I didn't want to waste the police's time, especially since I had no concrete evidence of a break-in. One night I felt bolder than usual. I closed around 7. It was getting dark because it was late fall and the sun set earlier. I grabbed a small flashlight from my shop and walked over to the empty store's window. I pressed my face against the glass, shining the light inside. My heart raced, and my palms were sweaty. I saw the shelves, coated in dust, their metal frames rusted at the edges. I saw at least 3 open boxes on the floor, each one crumpled and caked with dirt. The posters on the walls were torn in half, hanging by old tape. I didn't see any movement. The beam of my flashlight just revealed more emptiness. But I got a strong smell of dampness or mildew through a small crack in the doorframe. It made me cough. Then, I heard a light tap from somewhere inside. It sounded like a footstep or a knuckle brushing against a surface. I stepped back immediately, my foot catching on the raised edge of the sidewalk. I nearly fell backward. My flashlight slipped from my hand, bouncing on the concrete. I left as fast as I could. I lost sleep for a couple of nights after that. My mind kept replaying that tap. It was so clear, like it was right next to me. I told a friend who runs a convenience store a few blocks over. He laughed nervously and said maybe there was a rat infestation or a cat sneaking in. I've dealt with rats before in my old shop, and that sound was too deliberate. Still, I let him believe it was just animals. Telling him about the moving shadow or the flickering light made me sound unstable, so I kept those details to myself. A few days later, I decided to walk around the building to see if there was a back entrance. My own shop shares the rear alley with the neighboring stores. I wanted to see if the abandoned store had a door that someone could break into. Around midday, I stepped out for lunch and took a walk down the alley. The place smelled of garbage and old cooking oil from the nearby restaurants. Sure enough, there was a metal door at the back of that store. It had rust on the hinges and a thick chain with a padlock. The lock didn't look broken. Everything seemed secure. I kicked the bottom of the door lightly. It felt solid. I didn't hear any response from inside. I felt relieved for a moment, thinking maybe I was just scaring myself for no reason. That sense of relief didn't last long. A week later, I closed around 9 after dealing with a late customer who needed a big order of printed forms. I stepped outside, locked up, and looked at the store again. The front window was dark as usual, but the second I started to walk away, I heard another thump from inside, louder than before. My nerves were shot. I clutched my keys so hard my hand hurt. I stood still, staring at that dusty glass. Then I noticed a faint light shining from behind the counter inside the store. It wasn't strong, more like a dull glow. It moved back and forth as if someone was pacing. I couldn't see a person, only a shifting light. My breathing got shallow, and I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. I took one shaky step closer. I heard a scraping sound, like a piece of furniture sliding across the floor. That was enough for me. I turned around and hurried to my car without looking back. I could feel cold air burning my lungs as I walked. My shoulders were tense, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to burst out of that store's door. But nothing happened. I drove home, hands shaking on the steering wheel, parked my car, and sat there for a few minutes to calm down. My shirt was damp with sweat and my mind wouldn't settle. I haven't called the cops yet. Maybe I'm afraid they won't find anything and I'll look like an idiot. Or maybe I'm worried they will find something and I'll regret poking my nose into it. All I know is that the store remains locked, and nobody has officially returned. Yet there's movement inside at night, and strange noises echo through the walls. I try to leave earlier in the evening now, and if I stay late, I keep my phone in my hand, ready to dial. I glance inside the abandoned shop sometimes during the day, hoping to see that it's truly empty and that I imagined everything. But when night comes and I pass by after closing, my skin prickles. I can't shake the feeling that something or someone is in there, just beyond that dusty glass. For now, I keep my distance. I stay alert when I lock up. I walk by quickly, eyes forward, praying that I won't catch a glimpse of another strange light or hear another loud thump. My shop walls are thin. Sometimes when I'm sorting papers or preparing orders at night, I pause and listen. I wonder if I'll hear something through the wall. And every time I think I hear a soft knock or a scrape, I freeze, my heart pounding. I remind myself there's no proof of anything, and it might be my imagination. Still, I feel a dread in my chest when I think of that abandoned place side by side with my little shop. I keep telling myself it's probably nothing serious, but I can't deny the fear I feel when I walk past that door at closing time. I'm just hoping it stays on the other side of that wall. I remember the first night I heard those scratching sounds. It was around midnight. I was sitting in my living room trying to read through some documents for work. I kept hearing these light taps above my head, like nails scraping on wood. At first, I thought it was a branch brushing against the roof. I shrugged it off and went back to reading. Then I heard a louder scratch, like something dragging across the attic floor. It set me on edge. I got up and walked around the house, listening, but the noises stopped for a while. I decided I was just tired and needed sleep. I turned off the lights and went to bed. The next morning, I felt uneasy. I went upstairs and pushed open the attic door. I expected dust and old boxes, the usual stuff people store away. I climbed the steps, feeling the creaking wood under my shoes. I slid my flashlight around the space. I couldn't see anything unusual at first, just some old furniture, a few suitcases, and a pile of newspapers. Then I noticed long, thin marks on the floorboards. They looked like claw marks. They were spaced out in an odd pattern. I felt my stomach tighten when I realized they cut deep into the wood. I ran my finger along one of them and felt how sharp the edges were. I exhaled slowly and tried to calm myself. I thought maybe an animal got in. I checked the corners of the attic, but I didn't see any nests or droppings. Still, those scratches didn't look like something a raccoon would make. I went downstairs and tried not to think about it. I went to work, dealt with meetings, phone calls, and all the usual hassles. But the entire day, I kept remembering those marks. My mind drifted toward weird possibilities, like maybe I had a squatter up there. But that didn't explain the claw-like grooves. When I got home, I decided to seal up any openings that might let an animal inside. I climbed up on a ladder outside and checked the roof, but everything looked intact. I looked at the vents and the eaves. I didn't see any obvious holes. My house is a bit old, so I expected cracks or loose shingles, but I didn't spot anything big enough to let in a large animal. That night, I couldn't focus on anything else. Around 11, I heard the scratching again. This time it moved across the ceiling in slow, deliberate steps. I stood underneath it near the hallway. My heart pounded. My palms felt damp. I listened closely, trying to figure out which direction it moved in. It drifted toward the attic door. I grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer. I stared at the attic entrance, debating if I should open it. My mind raced with doubts and fears, but I forced myself to pull the string that lowered the attic ladder. I climbed up one step, shining the beam around. The attic looked empty. I didn't smell anything strange at first. I remained there, half in and half out. My eyes darted to the far corner. I saw nothing. The scratches had stopped. The entire place felt silent and stale. I heard my own breathing and my pulse pounding in my ears. I decided to pull myself up the rest of the way. I stood in the middle of the floor, scanning left to right, my flashlight catching dust particles in the air. There was no movement. I walked carefully to the corner, tapped on the walls, and nudged aside some boxes with my foot. Nothing jumped out. I could feel tension in my neck and shoulders, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. But there was nothing. After 5 minutes, I decided I was done. I went back down, closed the attic door, and locked it. I felt a little ridiculous, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was up there. A few days passed. There were no new noises. The scratches were gone. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had imagined everything or exaggerated it. But on the fourth night, I smelled something foul in the hallway. It hit me like a punch in the face. It was strong, like rotten eggs mixed with stagnant water. I traced it to the attic door. I felt a twist in my stomach. I opened the door, and a rush of that odor came down. My eyes watered. I climbed up a few steps, pressing my shirt over my nose. I looked around with my flashlight, but all I saw were the same boxes and furniture. I backed away and closed the door. I spent the rest of the night in my bedroom trying to sleep. I kept the window open so I could breathe fresh air. My mind spun with the possibility of a dead animal in the attic, but those claw marks were still in my head. As the next week went on, I noticed a pattern. Every night, as the moon got fuller, the noises got worse. They started with faint scratch sounds. Then they turned into heavier thumping noises. My ceiling would creak as if something heavy crawled from one side to the other. Sometimes I heard a dragging sound, like something pulling itself along. When I walked around the house, the scratching followed me from above. It made me feel trapped. I'd turn on music to drown it out, but I still felt the vibration in the ceiling. I decided to set up a camera in the attic. I bought a cheap motion-activated cam and a small battery-powered light. I placed them near the attic entrance so I could catch anything walking by. I waited until nightfall and turned off the lights in the house, hoping the attic camera would record whatever was up there. I stayed in the living room, arms crossed, staring at the ceiling. The noise started around midnight again. I heard shuffling. My heart was thumping hard. I whispered under my breath, telling myself to stay calm. In the morning, I checked the footage. Most of it was dark and blurry. The light only came on for a few seconds at a time. I saw dust floating. At one point, I saw a quick glimpse of a shape moving at the edge of the camera's range. It looked hunched, like it was on all fours. It disappeared fast, then the motion light turned off. That was all. I replayed it over and over, but it was too dark to see details. I felt a cold sensation in my chest as I realized this wasn't a typical animal. It looked bigger than a raccoon or a cat, but I couldn't be sure. The following night, I tried leaving the attic door unlocked, hoping I could sneak up quietly. I waited until I heard the creature. Around 1 in the morning, it started moving again. I grabbed my flashlight, took a deep breath, and climbed the attic ladder without turning on any lights. I was sweating, and my stomach felt tight. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. I managed to get halfway into the attic before the smell overwhelmed me. It was that same rotten stench, only stronger. My eyes watered. I held back the urge to gag. I heard scratching on the far side of the attic near a pile of old blankets. I aimed my flashlight at the blankets, but I saw only lumps of fabric. Then I heard a hiss. My hands started shaking. I took a slow step forward. That's when I saw movement. I caught a glimpse of pale skin and long limbs. It moved behind a trunk out of the beam of my flashlight. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to leave, but I felt locked in place by fear and curiosity. Then I heard it breathing. It sounded wet and heavy, like it struggled for air. I backed away slowly. My foot caught on a loose board and it creaked. I froze. The hissing got louder. I aimed the flashlight again, and I saw an elongated arm or leg slip around the corner. It looked thin, with a hand that had long fingers or claws. I couldn't see its face. I turned and got the hell out of there. My lungs burned as I rushed down the ladder. I almost tripped. I stumbled into the hallway and slammed the attic door shut. I had trouble catching my breath. I felt sweat dripping from my forehead. My heart pounded. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure out what to do. My mind was in overdrive. I locked the attic door and wedged a chair under the handle. Then I sat on the floor. I was shaking all over. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I felt exhausted. I called in sick to work and sat at my kitchen table staring at the attic hatch. I thought about calling someone. Animal control, the police, an exterminator. But I kept imagining how that conversation would go. I'd say there's some weird creature in my attic. They'd probably laugh or think I was hallucinating. Plus, I wasn't even sure what I saw. My mind was running through different scenarios. Maybe it was a sick animal with mange. But that arm or leg looked disturbingly human in shape. I spent the day pacing around the house, going from window to window, checking the outside for any sign of an opening. Nothing explained how something that size could get in. By evening, the stench upstairs had faded a bit, but I could still smell it in the hallway. I noticed the moon was nearly full. I felt a knot in my gut. I drank coffee to keep myself alert. I had no plan, but I wanted to see if it would move around again. Sure enough, around 10 at night, I heard the first scratching. It was soft at first, then it escalated. I heard a dragging noise. I was in the living room with the lights off. I didn't want to move. I felt numb. Then I heard it crawl over to the attic door. The handle rattled. I bolted upright, staring at the hallway. The door stayed closed, but it shook a bit. I saw the handle turn slightly. The wooden frame creaked. My mouth felt dry. The rattling stopped for a moment. Then I heard a thump on the ceiling above me. I gripped my phone, thinking of calling for help, but I froze. After a few minutes, the noise moved away from the door. I stepped into the hallway and looked up. The handle had returned to its normal position. I heard scraping on the far side of the attic again. It sounded like something was rummaging through the old furniture. I stood there holding my breath, listening. After an hour, it went quiet. The smell lingered, but the sound stopped. Over the next few nights, it repeated the same pattern. On each night of the full moon, it grew more active and the odor grew stronger. The rest of the month, it was quieter, though I still caught faint scratching once in a while. I started sleeping with earplugs, but that only stopped the sound. I still felt vibrations through the walls. I tried going up again during the day, but all I ever saw were claw marks and scattered junk. It almost felt like it was mocking me, staying hidden in the shadows. I tried setting out traps with bait, hoping to lure it out or at least catch it on camera. I got nothing. The trap stayed empty. The camera only recorded shifting boxes or flickers of movement out of frame. Each time I checked, I felt more drained. I couldn't rest properly because I knew it was still there. Last week, the moon started to wax again, getting closer to full. I felt dread the moment I realized it. My body reacted with cold sweats. My appetite vanished. I started double-checking every lock in the house. I put new bolts on the attic door. I even installed a heavy latch on the outside, something I could lock without opening the hatch. I thought that might contain it better, but I still hear it. A door latch won't stop something that can leave those deep claw marks. Tonight the moon is full. I can see it through the window, bright in the sky. It's almost midnight. I'm in the living room again, with all the lights on this time. I can't stand the dark right now. I have a baseball bat next to me. I'm not sure if it'll do any good, but I feel better holding it. My legs are jittery, and my jaw feels tense. I keep grinding my teeth. Every so often I hear movement above. It's not constant, it's more like short bursts of sound, followed by long stretches of silence. The house smells stale, like it needs fresh air, but I don't want to open the windows. I'm too anxious to get comfortable. I keep imagining that creature. I remember its limbs slipping behind that trunk. I replay that hiss in my head. It didn't sound like a simple animal growl. It had a sharp edge to it, almost like a warning. I wonder what it does up there all day. I wonder how it survives between full moons. I wonder if it's intelligent enough to understand locks and doors. I can't focus on anything else. My mind keeps looping back to these questions. A little while ago, I heard 3 heavy thumps, like it threw something against the wall. I jumped up ready to run outside, but then it went quiet again. I can still smell a slight hint of that rotten odor. I'm trying to breathe through my mouth to avoid it. My eyes feel tired, but I can't let myself drift off. I'm not sure what it wants or if it's planning to come through the hatch. I feel the tension in my shoulders growing by the minute. I've decided that after tonight, I'm going to leave this house for a while. I might get a motel room or stay at a friend's place. I need some distance. I can't keep living with this thing above me. I don't know how to fight it, or if that's even a good idea. I'm exhausted from the constant anxiety. I can't sleep, I can't focus, and I can barely eat. Right now, I'm waiting to see if the latch holds. If it tries to get out, I'll probably run. My hands are shaking even as I think about that. I don't want to confront it again. I've had enough of that smell and those unsettling sounds. I can feel my heartbeat going faster. My chest is tight. The house is silent for the moment, but that doesn't calm me. I know it's up there, waiting. I'm not sure how this will end. I don't have a neat conclusion. I only know that something with claws is living in my attic, and it becomes active on full moon nights. I've seen parts of it. I've smelled its foul odor. I've heard it move. That's all I've got. And tonight, the moon is bright. The time is dragging, and every small sound makes me jump. I can't shake the feeling that it's aware of me, that it's listening to my steps, just as I listen to its scratches. I wish I had a simple explanation, but I don't. All I can do is wait for the morning and hope I get through another night without a direct encounter. I'm counting the hours until sunrise. After that, I'm gone. Let the creature have the attic. It can keep the old furniture and the dusty boxes. I just want out of here in one piece.